Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Samantha Knight and Renee Aitken. Samantha Knight was born in 1977. She lived with her parents in the suburbs of Menly, Australia. But her parents' relationship did not last long, and they divorced. Then, she and her mother moved to Bronte. When she was in 6th grade, they relocated again, this time to Bondi, a suburb of Sydney, where they settled in an apartment on Imperial Street. Their lifestyle was modest. Her mother worked long hours, which forced her to be independent. Her father frequently visited and provided financial support. On August 19th, Samantha, a schoolgirl, turned 9 years old. After classes ended at 4 p.m., she returned home around 4:15 p.m., while her mother was still at work. In the 1980s, it was common in the suburbs to use simple door latches. The neighborhood was calm and safe, and everyone knew each other, allowing children to stay home alone in locked houses while their parents worked. This was considered normal, so Samantha had the freedom to come and go from their apartment while her mother was at work. August 19th was just like any other day. After school, Samantha changed into a pink skirt, a dark blue jumper, and blue sandals before heading out for a walk. A few hours later, her mother, Tess Knight, returned home from work and found a half-eaten sandwich in the kitchen, but little girl was missing. Tess wasn't initially worried, as it was common for Samantha to go for walks with friends and sometimes skip meals to do so. She continued with her evening routine, expecting her daughter to return soon. However, as it got darker, Tess began to feel anxious. Samantha usually came home before dark, and her absence was concerning. She decided to search for her daughter. Since they had recently moved to the area, not many people knew her, making the search more difficult. She asked neighbors, acquaintances, and Samantha's friends if they had seen her, but no one had any information, which heightened her alarm. Without a mobile phone, she couldn't call Samantha or track her whereabouts. When she returned home, Tess checked again to see if Samantha had come back while she was out, but she was still missing. In a state of urgency, she called emergency services to report her daughter's disappearance, Samantha. Soon after, the police came to her house. They spoke with she to gather details about Samantha's disappearance. She was confused and said she didn't know what had happened because she was at work. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the area, so the police had to rely on tips from witnesses who might have seen something unusual. Police immediately interviewed neighbors, friends, family members of Samantha and anyone nearby for clues. Several store employees reported seeing the girl. Samantha had visited at least 3 different sections of the store selling office supplies, and she was last seen walking down the street. Some witnesses thought she might have been talking to a man. However, they did not find anything suspicious. The police had no other leads. They thoroughly searched the area and followed the route Samantha had taken, but they did not find anything relevant to the investigation. The public was soon informed about the incident. The police requested assistance from local residents through the media, sharing Samantha's photo and description of clothing. Local residents acted quickly. The very next day, hundreds of volunteers participated in a search operation throughout the city. The media also extensively covered this tragic incident. The possibility that Samantha had left home was not even considered. She was too young. At her age, kids typically do not run away from home to spend time with friends. All of her belongings were still at home, and she had never displayed any rebellious behavior before. Samantha was a sweet, kind, and calm girl who worked hard in school, leading detectives to believe she had been kidnapped, possibly taken from her home by someone who maliciously opened the door. Local residents is extremely uneasy. There had never been a kidnapping in their quiet suburb. Residents began to scrutinize one another, fear that the criminal may be living in their area. Investigators had little information to investigate, relying mainly on interviews with local shopkeepers. Unfortunately, no one could provide useful leads to help locate Samantha. The investigation was further complicated because in the 1980s and 1990s, methods of tracking missing persons were not well developed. There were no alert systems like Amber Alerts, no DNA testing, and other modern investigative techniques. Therefore, law enforcement agencies need to conduct searches as efficiently as possible. For instance, they created a mannequin dressed like Samantha the day she disappeared to help jog the memories of those who witnessed it, but this did not produce the expected results. Tess was heartbroken. Samantha's father also joined the search for daughter. Initially, he was even considered a suspect, as investigators thought he might have kidnapped his daughter to keep her with him. However, he denied these accusations. He explained that he maintains a peaceful and respectful relationship with his ex-wife and sees his daughter regularly. There was no reason for him to kidnap her. When the investigation gets difficult, detectives must try their best to identify suspects. The relatives of Samantha began to lose hope of finding her alive and feared the worst. Police are also leaning towards the theory that the girl may have died, possibly taken by human traffickers and taken to another country. This theory was explored, but for 12 years, there is no evidence to confirm this. When the police received a significant lead from a woman, they focused on a local resident named Michael Guider. He lived near where Samantha had disappeared, had been in prison since 1996 for child rape and may be a suspect in Samantha's disappearance. Michael's life is full of disgusting incidents. Born in 1950, he grew up in Melbourne with an alcoholic mother and a younger brother named Tim, born in 1953. Eventually, their mother sent them to an orphanage, where Michael faced further sexual abuse from older children, many of whom were under the influence of drugs. Other children also suffered violence, including Tim, but they all remained silent due to threats. Michael's mental health becomes increasingly serious, and as he matures, he begins to negatively impact the other children in the orphanage. When he was 15 years old, he escaped and began a life of petty crime. His younger brother, Tim, no better, he committed armed robbery and was imprisoned for it. After serving his time, Tim seemed to reform. He became a sculptor, got married, and had children, staying out of trouble and off criminal records. In contrast, Michael continued his criminal activities and showed no intention of changing. He never held a steady job and only worked part-time as a gardener, mowing lawns for neighbors. Michael's first arrest came in the 1970s, when he was charged with setting fire to a store. As an adult, he developed a passion for Australian Aboriginal culture and became knowledgeable about rock art. However, in 1996, he was convicted of sexual offenses for molesting 11 children, aged 2 to 16. At least 60 similar charges were brought against him. Some sources suggested that the actual number of victims could be much higher. During the investigation into the child abuse cases, Michael quickly cooperating with the police. This was taken into account during the sentencing. As a result, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Michael usually acts in a consistent manner. He targeted vulnerable single mothers, often those who struggled with alcohol or drug addiction, or those who were easily influenced. By building trust with these women, he presented himself as kind and courteous, manipulating their perceptions to lower their guard. He often sought opportunities to be alone with their children, claiming he wanted to care for them while their mothers were away. Mothers noticed his attentive behavior and had no qualms about leaving him with their children. By posing as a caregiver, he gained access to the children, which he exploited. Michael would give the children Coca-Cola that was laced with sleeping pills. Once they were unconscious, he photographed and sexually assaulted them. Eventually, some children had the courage to tell their mothers about Michael, and the truth was revealed that he was acting like a serial predator. When the police searched his home, they discovered a large stash of photos, numbering in the thousands. Several photos showed instances of sexual abuse while the victim was unconscious, including images of Samantha and one of her friends without clothes. In one of the photos, police discovered the best friend of Samantha. At that time, she was already 21 years old, and detectives attempted to speak with her. However, both she and her mother refused to cooperate. Eventually, they were summoned to court and compelled to testify. Investigators are looking into a connection between Michael, a serial rapist, and Samantha's disappearance. Among the evidence found, police discovered a peculiar album containing newspaper clippings about missing children, including Samantha. Detectives were curious about why he kept these clippings. Normally, criminals often do this to gather mementos related to their crimes. During questioning, Michael claimed he was simply interested in unsolved cases out of curiosity. While this album was not a major issue, when combined with other elements of his criminal record, it raised serious concerns. After reviewing all the evidence, including photographs of violent scenes, police filed 11 additional charges against him. The total sentence for these new crimes was 6.5 years. At that time, investigators were unable to charge Michaels with kidnapping Samantha, but they suspected his involvement in her disappearance and continued to monitor him. While he was in prison, police observed that he was beaten during all interrogations. He endured severe mistreatment, his cellmates attacked and assaulted him, and the guards failing to intervene. In 2000, journalist Denise Hoffman wrote a book about the missing child, Samantha. She was personally acquainted with Michael and highly appreciated his work as a renowned expert on Australian Aboriginal life. He was knowledgeable in this field and had appeared on television. However, despite their friendship and his expertise, Denise had strong reasons to believe that he was linked to the case of Samantha's disappearance. She begins investigating on her own after he confides in her about his wife, who also knows Samantha's mother. Denise noticed that Michael's demeanor changed significantly whenever the conversation shifted to Samantha's case. During these discussions, his expression will change a lot. He began speaking in a strange, muffled tone and appeared increasingly unsettling. This behavior made Denise even more suspicious of him. Unfortunately, Denise were unable to resolve the case and failed to get a confession from Michael. He denied any involvement in Samantha's disappearance, claiming he had only seen her a few times and did not remember her. This was clearly a lie. To assist the police, Michael's younger brother, Tim, agreed to help him confess. Tim underwent intensive training and consulted psychologists to find the most effective method to help Michael tell the truth. Michael was already under significant stress, and as he broke down, he confessed to accidentally killing Samantha in 1986. He described to the detectives what happened the day little girl disappeared. He claimed that he had known Samantha for some time and had earned her trust, which led her to agree to go with him that day. Michael drove her to a remote area in the wilderness. There, he offered her a bottle of CoCA laced with sleeping pills. After she drank it, she lost consciousness. When he began to assault her, she suddenly woke up and started screaming. To silence her, he gave her more sleeping pills, and she passed out again. Afterward, he briefly stepped out of the car for a walk. When he returned, he found that little girl was unresponsive. However, he maintained throughout the interrogation that it was an accident. He claimed he only intended to assault her and never meant to kill her, insisting that he had never killed anyone before. Michael accepts responsibility for his actions towards Samantha, but he did not apologize to her family or leave the courtroom. In 2002, he confessed during the trial to the unintentional murder of Samantha Knight and was sentenced to 17 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Samantha's family were outraged by what they considered a lenient sentence, but this was the maximum penalty for manslaughter at the time. The prosecutor called Samantha's best friend as a witness. This girl, who appeared in photographs and was believed to have also been affected by Michael's actions, had previously refused to speak to law enforcement, citing fears of revealing information. Her silence had serious consequences for many children, including the tragic loss of Samantha. She attended court with her mother, who supported her, but their identities were kept confidential. Samantha's best friend mentioned that she often felt lonely when her mother was at work, so she will go for a walk. During those times, she met Michael, who gave her the attention she craved. Friend claimed that Samantha's mother sometimes left she with Michael and even spent the night with him, during which he molested she. However, Samantha's mother firmly denied knowing Michael and insisted that she never left him alone with Samantha. Strangely, the witnesses later retracted their statements about Samantha without providing any reasons. Finding her remains for burial became extremely important. Initially, Michael claimed he couldn't remember where Samantha's body was. However, several years into his prison sentence, he suddenly recalled that he had buried her in Cooper Park, just a 15-minute drive from her home. Yet, he later changed his story again, saying the body was buried a bit farther away than he originally indicated. On the map, he pointed to an area where a yacht club now stands, which was built just a year and a half after Samantha's disappearance. Despite extensive searches in the area using trained dogs, Samantha's remains have never been located. To this day, her body has not been found, and many doubt it will ever be found. In addition, Michael is also suspected in the disappearance of 5-year-old Renee Aitken, who vanished without a trace in South Wales in February 1984. When there was a thunderstorm, her brother went to check on her and noticed she was missing. He found her bed empty and the front door open. He told their parents, who then called the police. They began searching for her immediately. However, there was a storm at the time, so it's possible that all the evidence was washed away. Initially, the main suspect was Brian James Fitzpatrick, a man with a history of child kidnapping. He lived nearby and knew Renee's family. However, he died in a car accident just weeks before his trial. For many years, the case went cold, but in 2013, police revisited the investigation and looked into Michael. At the time of Renee's disappearance, he worked as a gardener close to their home. A family member recognized that he bore a resemblance to a suspicious man who had been seen behind their house. In Michael's scrapbook dedicated to missing children, there were articles and photos of Renee. Researcher Denise Hoffman believed that Renee's case shared similarities with the disappearance of another girl, Samantha, as both were small and light. Michael could have used drugs to incapacitate Renee's and sneak her out of the house. Michael was skilled at gaining the trust of children, causing suspicions that he was involved in Renee's kidnapping. Detectives questioned him about the incident, but he denied any involvement. They believed him, even though he had previously denied involvement in Samantha's case, which he later admitted. However, the police concluded there was not enough evidence to charge Michael with kidnapping, and Renee's case remains unsolved. She has not been found. Both the police and Renee's family believe she has likely been dead for a long time. While in prison, Michael developed an interest in Aboriginal culture and history, studying various materials on the subject. He authored several works, which were sent to libraries across Australia. In total, he wrote 16 pieces, ranging from 6 to 28 pages long. He also pursued studies in archaeology and earned a degree in that field. Michael was remarkably intelligent, impressing everyone with his capabilities. He has the potential to become a scientist and can contribute to research projects. However, he chose a path of crime. In 2014, Michael became eligible for parole after serving the minimum term of his imprisonment. This made the public extremely indignant, as many people believed he should remain in prison. Individuals like him will never change and will continue to pose a threat to society. Due to public backlash, Michael's request for parole was not granted and he remains in detention. The public, including Samantha's mother, wants Michael to spend the rest of his life in prison. She continued to suffer from the pain of losing her daughter. She could not give her daughter a proper burial and had never seen any sign of remorse from Michael. Supporters of Michael sought to challenge his sentence. They pointed to his participation in 55 therapy programs in prison, claiming he had undergone rehabilitation and was a model prisoner, he deserving of freedom. He behaved well and did not violate prison rules, leading to his release on September 5, 2019, at the age of 68. As part of the bail conditions, Michael was required to stay under strict supervision for an additional 5 years in a special facility for former prisoners. Police fitted him with a tracking bracelet, and he was given a lengthy list of 56 restrictions. These included bans on visiting public places, playgrounds, and schools, a prohibition on contacting minors, restrictions on leaving the country, a ban on changing his name or appearance. He was also subject to regular checks for drug and alcohol use. Despite these measures, there was no guarantee that Michael, the serial rapist, would refrain from committing further crimes. Even his younger brother, Tim, believed releasing him was a mistake. The public was outraged by his release, they fearing that he was already planning new crimes against children. When Michael was released, he had a large tumor in his groin, which he had refused to treat while in prison due to a lack of trust in the medical staff. After his release, he focused on his health, successfully treating the tumor and managing his heart disease. However, he declined medication to reduce his libido because he believed they would interfere with his other medications. Initially, Michael stayed in a shelter near Long Bay, but when the public discovered his location and began to pursue him, he was moved to a secret location. The public was outraged that once his supervision period ended, he would be completely free, able to change his name and appearance, get married, have children, and travel, opportunities that Samantha would never have. This led many to believe that his sentence was unfair. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Chloe and Aubrey Berry. Wack-BJ is a small coastal settlement in Canada with a population of under 20,000 people. It is an ideal place for starting a family with a united, quiet, safe, but still well-developed community. On December 25, 2017, the town was alive with the Christmas spirit. The windows of the apartments along the street sparkled with colorful lights, and homes were beautifully decorated. However, the festive atmosphere was disrupted by the flashing lights of police cars responding to a tragic incident. Sarah worked for the local ferry service, which connected the mainland with coastal areas and several nearby islands for communication and cargo deliveries. She studied at the University of Victoria and completed an internship for this position. Prior to this, she worked in the public relations group. She was active and energetic in everything she pursued, which brought her success. Her relationship with Andrew blossomed quickly after they met, and they soon took their relationship to the next level. They got married and started a family, welcoming their daughter Chloe in 2013. 2 years later, they gave birth to their second daughter, Aubrey. At the beginning of their relationship, the love of young couple Sarah and Andrew seemed sincere and sweet. However, the pressures of daily life began to take a toll on their bond. After the family has children, their relationship deteriorated significantly. To make matters worse, Sarah faced the heartbreak of losing her father in a car accident. All of these things caused Andrew's behavior to change a lot. He became anxious, prone to outbursts over minor issues, and often directed verbal insults at Sarah. It was clear that Sarah's father had previously helped control Andrew's temper, but now that support was gone. As a consequence, Andrew's aggressiveness increased. Initially, Sarah attempted to resolve conflicts and kept their issues private, hoping this tough time would pass. Unfortunately, matters only worsened. During a tense argument over custody of her two daughters, Aubrey and Chloe, Andrew made serious threats, claiming that he would harm the entire family if the situation did not change. Sarah was deeply troubled by these threats, and Andrew's anger became increasingly uncontrollable. Andrew's behavior became erratic and dangerous. When he got angry, he drove recklessly, creating hazardous situations on the road. At first, he tried not to act like that when his daughter was there, but he eventually lost control and engaged in these antics even with the daughter in the car. It is clear that this marriage was once a happy one, but now it has become seriously dangerous for Sarah and her daughter, who were growing up in a hostile and unsafe environment. Despite this, Sarah made efforts to maintain the marriage. Months went by until Sarah reached her breaking point. She decided to end the relationship and told Andrew directly that he needed to move out that day. Instead of leaving calmly, Andrew has sparked another debate, barging into his wife's bedroom and trying to strangle her. Sarah managed to escape, grabbed her phone, and called the police. Andrew continued his aggressive behavior until the police arrived, clearly displaying his violent nature. He was quickly arrested and taken to the police station. After this episode, Sarah obtained a restraining order, preventing Andrew from approaching her or their children. This brought a sense of relief to the family, as Andrew was now under control. He moved into his own apartment and lived alone, while Sarah took care of their two daughters. She worked hard and often worked overtime to earn money to raise her children. Meanwhile, her mother also helps take care of the children while she is at work. During this time, Sarah and Andrew finalized their divorce, and Sarah was awarded full custody of their children. Because of his aggressive behavior, Andrew lost his visitation rights and was ordered to pay alimony. For 3 months, Sarah focused entirely on her daughters, giving them her love and attention. However, everything shifted when Andrew returned, saying he missed his daughters and wanted to meet with them. Sarah refused his request, and he was unable to see the children. At that point, Andrew seemed to have changed. With the help of a lawyer and witness testimonies, he wanted to protest the court's decision to grant custody of the child. Amendments were made to the court order, allowing him to see his daughters on weekends. He was proud that he now had official permission to meet with them. Sarah was responsible for bringing the girls Aubrey and Chloe to meet their father, Andrew, and she made sure to supervise their visits. During these times, Andrew was able to connect well with his daughters. Unfortunately, this was just the start of a tragedy. A few years later, issues arose concerning alimony and the shared ownership of the house. The court ordered Andrew to pay a large amount in alimony. Meanwhile, there were ongoing discussions about how to divide the jointly owned house for the benefit of their children. Andrew, the young father, refused to contribute any money towards the house. Consequently, the court allowed Sarah to buy Andrew's share of the property, valued at $60,000, for only $20,000, after deducting the alimony debt. The agreement means that Sarah will have full ownership of the house and will no longer be able to claim maintenance payments. Sarah accepted these terms. However, Andrew opposed this arrangement and sought to contest the court's decision. During this time, he frequently took their daughters to spend time, as the court permitted him to do so without the presence of their mother or any guardianship authorities. Soon, Sarah began to notice increasingly concerning signs regarding her children. After Andrew returning them one day, she discovered a bruise-like mark on Aubrey's head. When she called Andrew, he explained that Aubrey had accidentally hit herself while playing. However, during a later conversation, Aubrey revealed that Andrew had attempted to touch her inappropriately. Andrew dismissed the accusation as absurd, but Sarah believed her daughter. Determined to protect her children, she contacted Child Protection Services. An investigation was launched, and during this time, Andrew's interactions with Chloe and Aubrey were closely monitored. Although Sarah and Aubrey expressed concerns, law enforcement and child protection services found no evidence of any misconduct by Andrew, leading them to close the case. Andrew insisted that Aubrey's bruise was caused by her falling, which appeared plausible since he stated he had accidentally bumped into her during a game. Sarah argued that Andrew posed a danger to their daughters, Aubrey va Chloe. She noted that he had previously exhibited strange and suspicious behavior, and the daughters were often reluctant to spend time with him. In an effort to protect her children, Sarah attempted to restrict Andrew's visits. In late 2016, she once again questioned his ability to care for them after he left Aubrey alone in a stroller in a public area while he walked away. Furthermore, Sarah claimed that Andrew spoke badly about her in front of the children, which she thought was his way of trying to turn them against her. During the trial, Sarah and Andrew shared their accounts of the incident and presented their arguments. Ultimately, the situation remained unchanged. Aubrey va Chloe continued to live with Sarah, while Andrew was allowed to take them on holidays and weekends. The judge viewed Andrew as a caring father capable who could provide well for his daughters. The court concluded that Andrew's aggressive behavior was only temporary and linked to domestic issues, with no evidence of child abuse presented. Andrew was given another chance, and both he and Sarah received decisions that they must comply with so they can continue to communicate with 6-year-old daughter Chloe and 4-year-old daughter Aubrey. Chloe and Aubrey were bright, cheerful children with distinct personalities and interests. Chloe had just begun first grade at a local school, where she discovered her passion for horse riding, a skill her cousin had been teaching her since she was young. She also had a talent for art. Meanwhile, Aubrey was getting ready to start school. The sisters were full of energy and creativity, and they shared a close bond and a love for artistic activities. During the court hearings, the guardianship service assessed Sarah, the girl's mother, and found her to be an excellent parent. She worked hard to maintain a good relationship with her daughters, both during their time as a family and after the divorce. The judge required both Sarah and Andrew to complete special training courses, and Andrew was actively involved in the process. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough to prevent a tragic outcome. According to the custody agreement, Aubrey va Chloe were scheduled to spend Christmas 2017 with their father, Andrew. They celebrated Sarah's birthday on December 21st at morning with the children, and then Sarah took Chloe and Aubrey to Andrew's apartment on Beach Drive. Andrew lived just steps from the marina, in an upscale part of the city with a view of the Pacific coast. However, he is facing many great difficulties, including a financial crisis. He had quit his job, lost his main source of income, and developed a gambling addiction. As a result, he was unable to pay alimony or even provide basic necessities for himself and the children. From the beginning, Sarah believed it was a mistake to take Aubrey and Chloe to see Andrew. A court order obligated her to do so, and failing to comply could lead to serious repercussions for her. Sarah was especially hesitant to let Aubrey and Chloe spend the Christmas holidays with him, as she felt it was unfair, but she felt she had no alternative. Sarah asked Andrew to leave the children with her for her birthday, but he immediately threatened to sue, so she was forced to comply. As Sarah approached Andrew's apartment, her anxiety intensified. She noticed from a distance that the lights in the windows were off. For several weeks, Aubrey va Chloe had shared that during their visits with Andrew, they enjoyed using flashlights as if they were camping, which they found entertaining. Sarah was aware that Andrew had left his job in May and are having a lot of financial difficulties, which might explain why the electricity had been cut off. To avoid making the situation more tense and affect the children's vacation, she decided not to talk about the issue with Andrew and the children right away. However, she planned to address it later, as she was looking for ways to restrict Andrew meet to Aubrey va Chloe. When saying goodbye to Aubrey va Chloe, Sarah was understood that they would stay with Andrew until noon on December 25th, after which he was expected to return them. Upon returning home, Sarah noticed that Chloe had forgotten her favorite stuffed toy. She took the toy and brought it to Chloe. When she knocked on the window of Andrew's apartment, both Aubrey and Chloe appeared at the blinds in their holiday outfits, smiling and looking happy. This made Sarah feel a bit more at ease. She gave the daughters the toy and left, anticipating that she would see them again in a few days. On Christmas morning, Sarah woke up in a surprisingly quiet house and began her usual chores to pass the time until Aubrey and Chloe returned. During this time, she cleaned the house, decorated for the holiday, and placed presents under the tree, all in an effort to make the daughters happy. By 2 p.m., Sarah's parents arrived, but she was starting to worry because Aubrey and Chloe had not yet returned from Andrew's house. Andrew was supposed to return Aubrey and Chloe by noon, but Sarah had called and texted him several times without getting a response. She then tried to contact Andrew's sister, but she also ignored Sarah's calls and messages. Growing more worried, Sarah decided to go look for the children with her mother, leaving her father at home in case Andrew arrived with the daughters. When Sarah and her mother arrived at Andrew's apartment, Aubrey and Chloe were no longer at the window. Inside, the place felt eerily quiet and empty. Sarah couldn't see what was happening through the blinds. She knocked and shouted at the window, but there was no response, which only increased her fear. In desperation, they decided to speak with the neighbors. One neighbor mentioned that he had heard the children talking early in the morning and, closer to midday, he heard loud noises coming from the apartment. Initially, he thought nothing of it, but now it seemed suspicious. He also noted that he hadn't seen any strangers near the building. Alarmed, Sarah and her mother quickly contacted the police to report Aubrey and Chloe's disappearance. When the first police officer arrived at the scene, he attempted to contact Andrew, the apartment's owner, but received no answer, just as no one responded to Sarah's screams. The officer then tried to open the door and discovered it was not locked. Inside, the lights were off, and flipping the switch had no effect. It became clear that Andrew's electricity and water had been cut off due to unpaid utility bills, and he was facing eviction. Using a flashlight, the officer was met with a shocking sight that resembled a horror movie scene. Blood was splattered everywhere, including the ceiling, prompting him to immediately call for backup. The police officers cautiously, weapons drawn, aware that the killer responsible for the horrific massacre might still be inside. They followed a bloody footprint to the bathroom, where they discovered Andrew, who was naked and severely injured with multiple wounds to his chest. He was still breathing, but each breath seemed increasingly difficult. In the next room, they found Chloe on the bed. She was already dead. Her body showed numerous cuts and bruises, indicating she had been beaten with a blunt object. Nearby, a bloody baseball bat lay on the floor among her clothes. Aubrey was found in a similar state as Chloe, dressed in blood-soaked pajamas, with splatters even on the ceiling. Both children, Aubrey and Chloe, had suffered multiple lacerations and stab wounds, similar to those found on their father, Andrew. The police checked Aubrey and Chloe's pulses several times, but they were confirmed dead. An ambulance quickly arrived to assist Andrew. Due to the cramped space in the bathroom, he was placed on a stretcher and prepared to be carried out of the apartment. At that moment, he regained consciousness, looked at the medics, and simply asked them to end his life. Andrew was taken to hospital with other police officers, and they hoped to question him once his health has stabilized. Meanwhile, they informed Sarah that both of her daughters, Aubrey and Chloe, were dead. Overcome with grief, she screamed hysterically and desperately tried to enter the apartment. Sarah had many questions, and so did the investigators, about the brutal murders of her two young children on Christmas Day. She believed she knew the answer: their father had killed them. Given the severity of the injuries, Andrew quickly became the primary suspect. Sarah warned that he was a danger to himself and Aubrey and Chloe due to the nature of the wounds. The police thought he might be more willing to talk while in the hospital, as they often obtained truthful confessions in such situations. Therefore, they wanted to interview Andrew to uncover what had happened to the children and to him. The police suspected Andrew had harmed Aubrey va Chloe, defenseless children, and after realizing the gravity of his actions, he might have attempted to end his life. Aubrey va Chloe's bodies were so severely damaged that the expert believed he first killed Chloe, then he killed Aubrey. Chloe suffered multiple severe head injuries from a baseball bat, which led to a fractured skull. Additionally, she had 26 stab wounds. Some of her wounds were inflicted before her death, while others occurred posthumously. The cause of death was identified as blood loss. Aubrey's situation was tragically severe. She had 32 stab wounds, leading to fatal blood loss. The medical examiner determined that the attacker had flipped the children over twice to stab them in both the front and back. He appeared to be enraged and intended to ensure that the girls would not survive Christmas. Meanwhile, forensic investigators thoroughly examined the apartment and discovered men's jeans and a blood-soaked t-shirt, both belonging to Andrew. A knife, clearly the murder weapon, was also located at the scene. The amount of blood in the apartment was so much that a team of experts was called in to assist in the investigation. Experts discovered many signs that there were efforts to clean up the scene, including fingerprints on the knife and patterned socks. Blood traces were even found in the refrigerator, indicating that the perpetrator had rummaged through it after the attack. In one of the rooms, a note addressed to his sister was found. In this note, Andrew expressed a long list of disappointments about his difficulties with Sarah, and felt misunderstood by the woman he loved deeply. He conveyed a sense of betrayal and recounted the many struggles he faced during his marriage and after his divorce. According to his confession, the only source of happiness in his life was his children, which led him to decide to end their lives together. It was clearly a suicide note. After investigating the crime scene, the police concluded that Andrew had attacked and brutally killed his children, Aubrey, 4 years old, and Chloe, 6 years old. Following the incident, he entered the bathroom and attempted to harm himself, believing these injuries would also result in his death. However, doctors assessed that none of his self-inflicted wounds were life-threatening, so he survived. Andrew soon regained his composure and was placed under medical supervision, where he admitted to self-harm. After receiving treatment, he was arrested and charged with double murder. When Andrew was taken to the police station, Sarah was already there with her parents. The police believed that Andrew had harmed the children, and he confessed to his actions, which caused Sarah to burst into tears. She had to be taken away from the station because she was inconsolable. It is hard to imagine her despair and grief, especially since she had tried desperately to protect her daughters from their father. Despite filing complaints with Child Protection Services and taking legal action, Sarah could not provide evidence to prove that Andrew was a danger, and her claims were not believed. Tragically, her daughters were killed by their father. The case received widespread attention and many people held memorial services to honor Aubrey and Chloe, innocent girls who suffered. The public was outraged by Andrew's actions and expressed support for Sarah. This incident sparked a worldwide reevaluation of the child protection system and raised questions about the judge who deemed Andrew a father thoughtful and loving to his children. The judge's decision granted Andrew unsupervised access to Aubrey va Chloe, which ultimately resulted in their deaths. However, no disciplinary actions were taken against the judge or the Child Protection Service. The victims of the tragic massacre, Aubrey va Chloe, were cremated. During the investigation, the complicated relationship between Andrew and Sarah came to light. Andrew is having a lot of trouble with his finances. He left his job in May 2017 and had already begun having trouble keeping up with his rent and utility bills, leading to his electricity being cut off. His financial problems were largely fueled by his gambling addiction. Although Andrew earned a decent wage of around $200 per shift, but during this time, he became addicted to playing cards. He attempted to recover his losses, but things only worsened. He started borrowing money from anyone who would lend it to him. His gambling addiction spiraled out of control, with his gambling expenses reaching about $3,000 each month. In the fall of 2015, Andrew won a big amount of $100,000, but feeling overconfident, he quickly lost it all. In an attempt to win back his losses, he borrowed $10,000 from a man named Paul. Desperate to repay this loan, he continued to take out additional loans, while losing interest in his job, eventually quitting. By spring 2017, he was in deep financial trouble, owing approximately $225,000, with all his credit limits maxed out. Andrew was in a desperate situation, even thinking about withdrawing his savings from a pension fund. He couldn't afford to buy food and had to ask his neighbors for help to feed his daughters during their visit. His life was filled with ongoing tragedy. During the investigation, police found disturbing search queries in his internet history. About a month before the double murder, he had been searching for ways to end his own life. His problems grew worse, and on Christmas Day, he made a tragic decision. He used a brutal method to kill his daughters, doing this act coldly and mercilessly, which makes people doubt his love for them. On January 16th, the hearings for the double murder case began. The prosecutor presented detailed information to the jury about Andrew's relationship and life circumstances just before the crime occurred. The prosecution argued that Andrew willingly put himself in this situation because he could not overcome his gambling addiction. They described his actions as premeditated, using evidence like his internet browsing history to support their argument. In contrast, the defense attorney highlighted flaws in the investigation, pointing out that a patrolman had left the scene while waiting for backup, which left the situation inside unclear. The lawyer argued that Andrew and his children were victims of a killer seeking revenge for Andrew's debts after the officer had left the scene. This allowed the real perpetrator to escape through the fire exit. However, the prosecution rejected these things because the scene was under constant surveillance. There were no signs of a break-in, and the attacker could not have quietly exited the scene without being seen by the police officer. Furthermore, statement of the defense contradicted Andrew's confession made at the hospital. During his hospital stay, he even asked the medical staff to help him die, indicating that he had inflicted injuries on himself and wanted to end his life. It is clear from Andrew's suicide note that he intended to end his life and harm the daughters so that they would be with him in death. However, the lawyer maintained that the family could have been victims of a stranger, a killer who unexpectedly found Andrew and the children in the apartment. Alternatively, they could have all been random victims of a maniac. On April 25, 2017, a woman was attacked and stabbed near Andrew's house, but the police could not identify her attacker. The defense suggested that the same person could be responsible for both this attack and the murder of Andrew's children, who remains at large. However, the details of the wounds and the circumstances of each incident were different, indicating Andrew's guilt. During the presentation of the crime scene and evidence related to the murders of Aubrey and Chloe, Andrew started to cry. The prosecutor asserted that their father, Andrew, was responsible for the murders. One key piece of evidence was blood on the floor that matched Andrew's. If the attacker had been a stranger, they would probably have worn shoes typically found in a home. However, the shoes Andrew was wearing when he was arrested matched those discovered at the crime scene. Also, the forensic expert pointed out that the injuries on Andrew and the daughters were the same. Andrew acknowledged that he had inflicted wounds on himself, and similar cuts were found on the children, indicating that the same person used the same weapon. At trial, the defense attorney argued that Sarah had put pressure on Andrew, leading to the possibility of him acting aggressively. They believe Sarah is the main cause of Andrew's unstable mental health. In response, Sarah countered these claims, saying that Andrew had been aggressive for a long time, which led to their divorce. She was only trying to protect her children from a dangerous and unpredictable situation, which is why she filed complaints with various authorities, all of which were ignored. Sarah was concerned about the safety of her daughters during visits. Recently, Andrew appeared to have changed for the better, but no one realized this was just his cover. The defense continued to argue for Andrew's innocence, portraying him as a victim of his circumstances. They mentioned that Andrew owed $200,000 to another man. Andrew claimed he couldn't pay his debts, which led to him being forced to keep a suspicious bag in his apartment, the contents of which he was unaware of. Various individuals resembling criminals would periodically come to collect it, and Andrew had given them a spare key. According to the lawyers, one of these individuals committed a violent act in the apartment. The prosecution questioned Andrew about why the attacker would kill Aubrey and Chloe in his apartment while he was there. Andrew claimed that he lost consciousness after being struck, and when he regained it, he found Aubrey va Chloe unresponsive. The attacker was still in the apartment, but due to the darkness, Andrew couldn't see his face clearly. However, he noted that the assailant was a dark-skinned man with dark hair. The attacker then ran into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and tug of war, during which Andrew was struck multiple times and lost consciousness again. A mysterious bag was discovered during the investigation, but no evidence of any intruder was found, including DNA or fingerprints. The prosecution argued that Andrew's primary motive for the murders was financial distress. He was struggling to cope with life, unable to pay his debts or child support, leading him to consider killing his children to escape these obligations. The jury deliberated for 3 days and ultimately found Andrew guilty of double second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, eligible for parole in 22 years. Andrew showed no emotion when the verdict was announced, shocking Sarah's family because the sentence was too light. They also found themselves unable to contest the verdict. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shurtha and Leon Brits. Our story takes place in a small town called Path, South Africa, with a population of about 3,000 people. In 1979, Leon Brits was born there. He had a brother named Toki. Their father owned a local hotel and other businesses, providing a comfortable living for the family. Leon was a bright and hardworking student who excelled in school and was active in sports. As a teenager, he started working in the family's hotel, learning to manage the business and assisting his father. Once his brother was old enough, the Leon brothers worked together. The Leon were a close-knit family, respected throughout the area. When Toki turned 18, he left their small town, but Leon remained with his parents. Leon dreamed of taking over the family hotel business, which frequently hosted large events and parties. At one of these events, Leon noticed a stunning girl with chestnut hair and eyes. He couldn't stop looking at her and decided to introduce himself. However, the girl, Shurtha, had just turned 14, although she appeared older, while Leon was already 25. Shurtha was born on September 6, 1990, and was the youngest of 4 siblings. Suritha's family lived in poverty, and their situation became worse when her father died of a poisonous spider bite. Her mother was left to raise 3 children on her own. Shurtha endured hardships with her family for many years. Suritha's family barely had enough money to buy food, making the future of the children very bleak. Then Leon, who came from a wealthy family, met Shurtha and fell in love with her despite their large age gap. Shurtha, a schoolgirl, was also drawn to Leon. They started talking, and Leon pursued her with extravagance, taking her to fancy places and giving her expensive gifts. This left a strong impression on Shurtha, who was extremely grateful to Leon. She realized she could build a future with him without lacking anything. Their relationship blossomed as Shurtha enjoyed Leon's attention, and Leon loved her very much. A few months later, Leon expressed his wish to marry Shurtha, and his mother approved after meeting her. They then began dating officially, and their relationship seemed perfect. However, when Shurtha turned 15, her classmates noticed changes in her behavior. She started wearing loose-fitting clothes, avoided showing her belly, and became very shy, as if she didn't want to be approached. Eventually, Shurtha told Leon that she suspected she might be pregnant. Leon was very upset, as a pregnancy could result in accusations of statutory rape since he was already 26 years old. Leon, who controlled the relationship, had initiated their intimacy. To address Saritha's suspicions, he gave her money to visit the clinic, where the doctor confirmed she was pregnant with twins. When she told Leon the news, he became angry and insisted she not keep the pregnancy, giving her money for an abortion. Despite her hesitation, the pressure from Leon and their age difference compelled her to comply. She went to the clinic alone and followed Leon's demands. Leon wasn't opposed to having a family and children, but he believed everything had its proper time and that they should wait until she was at least an adult. After the procedure, when Shurtha returned from the clinic, her mental health was severely impacted. Leon thought that taking walks would help her recover quickly, not realizing she was in a lot of pain. Her emotional recovery needed more time. Shurtha eventually overcame the trauma, and their romantic relationship continued. Leon still wanted children but asked her to wait. By the end of 2008, Shurtha was in her final year of school, preparing for her exams. At 18, she became pregnant again and told Leon about it. Leon was unhappy once more, but this time, Shurtha refused to have another abortion. She was now old enough to make her own decisions. Shurtha insisted on keeping the child and decided not to follow Leon's wishes. He agreed. She graduated from school in early 2009 while pregnant. Shurtha and Leon decided to get married. Although Leon was uncertain about marriage, they had come too far in their relationship, so they went ahead with the wedding. Shurtha had her first child a year later, twin boys. The couple was very happy. After the twins were born, Leon's father passed away, and his mother began to suffer from age-related problems that made it difficult for her to manage the family business. Leon and his brother decided to put their mother in a nursing home so that she could receive proper care. Leon then took full control of the hotel. During this time, he also owned a mining equipment store and a restaurant, both of which were aimed at serving miners by providing food at their workplaces. He also owned rental properties. These ventures generated a good income for the family, allowing them to live comfortably. Due to his heavy workload, Leon decided to involve his wife in the family business. He didn't pressure her, as she had already wanted to start working in business. Leon entrusted her with managing the equipment store. She began handling supplies while caring for their two young children, which made managing the business challenging. Although she couldn't take on a large workload, she managed to handle her responsibilities effectively. By this time, the children had grown up and started school. In South Africa, getting an education can be a challenge as not every small town has educational facilities and the quality is often subpar. Ensuring the best quality education often requires daily travel between cities. However, Saritha's family rented a house in a nearby major city for the duration of the children's schooling. Leon decided to send the children to Kakumahi with Shurtha. She had to take care of the children herself and give up her business. They only visited Leon on weekends to spend time with him. At first, everything seemed fine, but over time, the distance between the spouses became more apparent. The children couldn't communicate with their father regularly, and Shurtha rarely saw her husband. Their relationship grew much colder than it was at the beginning of their marriage. In 2017, Shurtha began experiencing health issues. She was diagnosed with cancer, heart problems, and arthritis. She underwent surgery to remove the tumor, which saved her life by preventing the disease from progressing. To address her other health issues, Shurtha started traveling to Johannesburg every month to receive special treatments from specialists at a clinic. All of this was funded by Leon, who genuinely wanted to help Shurtha and supported her while continuing to manage the business. The biggest challenge during this period was taking care of the children, but the couple solved it by hiring a nanny to help. The family business was very profitable, and Leon's workplace and home were both equipped with safes. Thanks to the extensive business, Leon became wealthy, but at the cost of having to work long hours without days off. In addition, getting rich in a poor country is very dangerous. Because he had unintentionally attracted many people who were jealous of his life. Starting in 2017, Leon encountered problems in his business, which led to many people publicly threatening him. At this time, Leon confided in his wife that he felt unsafe and feared for his life. The couple discussed these issues regularly to ease his anxiety, but the situation did not improve. Gradually, the threats became a regular occurrence. Leon began to ignore the threatening messages, as they came almost every day over trivial matters. A few years later, a terrible tragedy occurred on October 7, 2020. After a brief phone call with Shurtha, her husband returned home to check on the dogs. He then stopped communicating, which worried Shurtha. She decided to go home to check on him. That day, after arriving home and going inside, the house was strangely quiet and empty. Shurtha searched every room and finally discovered Leon's body floating in the pool. In shock, she contacted Leon's brother and then called the police to report her husband's death. Leon's brother and the hotel manager were the first to arrive at the scene of the tragedy, followed shortly by the police. It was clear that Leon's death was no accident. He had been brutally beaten before falling into the pool, suggesting that it was likely a targeted killing. Police quickly noticed that apart from a broken safe, no valuables had been stolen, despite the fact that there were plenty of items worth stealing in the house. This seemed unusual, as thieves usually stole anything of value. The case quickly attracted widespread attention and became a major topic in the South African media. Social networks are full of rumors and speculation. Rumor has it that the businessman has many serious enemies and has received threats. Some say that people who had quarrels with Leon may have been involved in the case. The police receive reports from random people every day, and it takes them a long time to process so many false complaints. Initially, Leon's brother Toki was suspected of being the culprit because he was seen at the crime scene shortly before Leon's death. The suspected motive was their mother's will, which was kept in Leon's safe, and Toki wanted to amend the document for fear of losing his inheritance. At the time, their mother was seriously ill and left a will. The police attempted to prove that there had been serious conflicts between them over the matter, but they were unsuccessful. Toki insisted that there had been no conflict, saying that his meetings with Leon were very normal and that they did not usually argue about money. Toki sought comfort from Shurtha, who believed he was innocent and promised to find him the best lawyer. The housekeeper knew about the cameras in the house and informed the police, which gave them access to the footage. They also collected recordings from cameras at the entrance to the house. Briso Shurid, the housekeeper, was brought to the station to help identify the people in the footage. But she was unable to recognize anyone. The police had no solid leads. Leon's brother Toki remains a suspect due to a possible inheritance dispute, but without evidence against him, the case has been dropped. A few months later, Jacques van Vuren, 37, contacted the police and told the whole truth about Leon's murder. Because the criminal wanted to confess, in exchange for a lighter sentence, and agreed to expose all his accomplices. It turned out that in the Shurtha family, things were not as rosy as they seemed. The couple's distance not only cooled their relationship, but also completely destroyed it. One day, Shirley took her husband's mobile phone and discovered photos of other women. At that time, she herself was unfaithful to Leon. Shirley was beautiful and attracted to many men. At the time of her marriage, she had a brief relationship with a lover. But during her medical treatment in Johannesburg, she developed a more serious relationship. She visited her lover every time she went to the hospital for treatment, during which time their relationship deepened. She considered leaving her husband. This seemed pretty straightforward since they lived in separate homes and rarely communicated. Not long after, she asked her husband for a divorce. It is unclear whether she simply wanted to end her relationship with her husband to be with her lover or whether she intended to marry him. Leon did not know about the betrayal, but he was shocked by his wife's desire for a divorce. At first, he reacted very violently and expressed his grief. Then he calmed down and threatened that if she filed for divorce, he would take everything from her, including money and children. Memories of her poor childhood still haunted her. Due to pressure from her husband, Shirley had to give up her plans. She no longer loved her husband Leon, but she did not want to lose everything. In desperation, Shirley turned to her lover, who lived near Johannesburg, to see if he could help her leave her husband. She repeatedly asked him for help, but he refused. He tried to convince her that it was a bad idea. Eventually, she stopped making these requests. One day, Shirley was talking to her lover. During the conversation, she said that she no longer had to worry about her husband because a classmate was willing to help resolve the situation. At first, her lover took these words as a joke and the couple never brought up the subject again. However, it was not a joke. Shirley was actually talking to her classmate, Jacques van Vuren. At the time, Jacques was going through a difficult time. He had just divorced and his ex-wife had moved out with the children. He had also been injured at work, forcing him to reduce his hours and income. Despite this, he still had to pay child support, which led to serious financial difficulties. In the face of these difficulties, Jacques relapsed into drug addiction, which drove his wife away from him. Shirley and Jacques met again by chance at a barbecue, where he confided in her about his troubles. Shirley decided to take advantage of this opportunity. She had obtained Jacques' phone number. Shirley contacted Jacques. She said that her husband had been abusing her for years, so she wanted to get away from his control. And Jacques believed her. He was extremely disgusted by Leon's behavior. Shirley had reached Jacques' limit, as he had had a difficult childhood. He lived with an abusive father who had physically and mentally abused him, leaving him traumatized, and Sarita's story was effective. Finally, he agreed to help Shirley resolve her situation. She promised to pay 400,000 rand, a large sum that could help Jacques solve all his financial problems. During this time, Leon's business was struggling. His hardware store and restaurant had also closed. The estate was abandoned and did not generate any income. The Leon family had been living off their savings, but with the high costs of maintaining their lifestyle, their financial reserves began to run out. In this context, Leon often quarreled with his wife. Their relationship began to fall apart, which only made the situation worse. Finally, Shirley decided to get rid of her husband again. She contacted Jacques, who asked for half the money in advance. Shirley withdrew 70,000 rand and met Jacques to discuss the plan. She promised to give the remaining money through her housekeeper, who worked for Leon and had moved into her house to help with the housework. The next day, she gave Jacques an envelope containing 1,000 rand. With the deposit, Jacques hired his university friend Enrich Williams. Enrich initially refused to participate in the murder, but due to financial difficulties, when Jacques offered him a large sum of money, he could not resist and agreed. Enrich was 34 at the time and worried that he couldn't handle Leon on his own. So he found a place to stay, a Mantel Bariki, a recent college graduate. Amantel, just 24, had studied engineering and dreamed of building his own house. Like many others, he was struggling financially. When he was told of the amount of money involved, Amantel agreed to help. Then the plan entered a careful preparation phase. Shurtha filmed a video showing the layout of the house and discussed the attack with the criminals. Shurtha let the criminals into the house so they could hide behind a large sofa in the living room. Her role was to lure her husband into the house while she was receiving treatment in Johannesburg. Jacques was not allowed in the area because witnesses could identify him as a friend of the couple. So Enrich and Amantel had to carry out the attack. Shurtha insisted that the attack looked like a robbery, so she allowed the criminals to take whatever they wanted from the house. She also asked that Suritha's beloved dogs be kept safe. To distract the dogs, they bought a package of sausages. The sausages were scattered around the yard to lure the dogs away. A rehearsal was scheduled for early October, but was cancelled when Leon's brother Toki visited on October 5th and stayed overnight. The attackers had everything ready and planned to burn clothes and any other evidence after the murder to avoid leaving any clues for the police. While waiting for the signal to start, Jacques tried to calm down. He broke his rule of staying away from the area where Leon would be killed by driving past the house several times before returning to wait for the signal to continue. At around 6 a.m. the next day, while Leon was at work, the attackers entered the house and hid behind the sofa. At 10 a.m., Shurtha called Leon to say that, according to the housekeeper, the dogs were missing. Leon needed to go back to look for them, which seemed normal to him, so he returned to the house, unaware that his attackers were waiting inside. As Leon entered the living room and turned around, the attack began. He was stabbed in the back by Amantel with a knife. Despite being caught off guard, Leon fought back. During the struggle, Enrich grabbed a baseball bat and began beating Leon. Leon fell to the ground. He was stabbed 8 times, and then they used a dog collar to strangle him to death before stealing his wallet. They then carried Leon and threw him into the pool. Then went back into the house, opened the safe, and stole money in diamonds. They fled the scene after carrying out their plan. At the time, Shurtha was in Johannesburg for treatment, which gave her an alibi. After learning about the incident, Shurtha returned home, where she discovered her husband's body. Later, when Shurtha was invited to the police station to view the surveillance camera footage, she noticed her old school friend Jacques in the video. Although his face was not visible, the footage captured his car driving suspiciously past their house twice. Shurtha did not claim to recognize the car, but the police took notice of it, although the license plate was unclear. While the investigation was ongoing, Shurtha used a disposable phone to avoid detection and keep their conversations from being monitored. It turned out that Shurtha had provided the police with information regarding Toki and tried to blame him for her husband's death. Shurtha had gone to great lengths to play the role of a grieving widow. Even after the funeral, Toki remained unsuspecting and continued to contact Shurtha, supporting her during this difficult time. During this time, Toki began to notice significant changes in Suritha's behavior. She no longer appeared to be a grieving widow. In fact, she had gotten a tattoo, despite Leon's constant objection to her getting one. In addition, Shurtha began riding a motorcycle, which Leon was also adamantly against. She began wearing more revealing and provocative clothing, along with heavy, aggressive makeup, which had always annoyed Leon when he was alive. Despite all these changes, Toki remains unaware of Suritha's involvement in the crime. During this time, Shurtha suffered financial hardship as her family assets were frozen due to the ongoing investigation. She was unable to pay the remaining 200,000 rand to the killers and had no personal savings. The killers became angry and began to threaten her. Jacques regularly contacted her to demand money, but Shurtha continued to delay payment by insisting that the assets were still frozen. The situation became so bad that she hired a bodyguard to move into her home. The bodyguard began helping to look after the children, leading neighbors to assume that he was her new partner. Jacques also received threats from Enrich and Amantel, the killers, as he was responsible for paying the remaining amount to them, but he could not do so without money from Schurthe. On one occasion, Jacques went to visit his sister and received several threats along the way, which made him fearful. Under emotional pressure, he confessed to his sister about the murder, and she informed their mother. His sister then tried to convince him to go to the police and confess, and he finally agreed. This led to the full truth about the murder being revealed. When the police arrived at Sarita's house, she said that she was upset because Leon did not approve her divorce and refused to pay for her medical treatment. However, there was no evidence in their correspondence to substantiate her claims. The possible motive for her decision to kill her husband was that he was planning to sell the dilapidated hotel. She, who had become accustomed to a lavish lifestyle, did not want to sell it. Meanwhile, Leon's main goal in selling the hotel was to pay off his debts and spend more time with his family. He had neglected his children and wife, so he planned to retire and pursue a quieter, more settled life with them. Unfortunately, this decision eventually led to his death. Jacques Van Vuren was sentenced to 25 years in prison, eligible for parole in up to 5 years, with the possibility of early release for good behavior. In exchange for his cooperation, he agreed to testify against others involved in the massacre. Enrich Williams and Amantel Bariki were also arrested and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Leon Britz. On March 19, 2021, police arrested Schurthe Britz. She quickly pleaded guilty to murder and armed robbery. As a result, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison for murder and 15 years in prison for armed robbery, both sentences to run concurrently. Because she pleaded guilty, she will have the opportunity to be paroled with minimal restrictions. Throughout the trial, Schurthe portrayed herself as the victim in her relationship with Leon, which began when she was 14 years old. He pressured her to have an abortion and controlled many aspects of her life. Although there was no evidence of physical violence or suffering, the Supreme Court accepted her claims. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Polly Klaas. Polly Hannah Klaas was born on January 3, 1981, in Fairfax, California, USA. Her family included her father Mark, mother Eva, and younger sister Annie. After her parents' divorce when she was very young, Polly and Annie lived with their mother in Petaluma, California. As for Mark, he had a new relationship after the divorce, and Polly got along very well with this woman. Overall, their family was very harmonious, and she spent time with both her mother and father, with no problems between them. Polly was a quiet and innocent child who had a few close friends but was generally very shy. However, she found confidence and joy in theater, participating in various school plays and community musicals where she often took the lead role. Her main aspiration is to become a talented musical theater actress. Aside from theater, Polly loves hosting and attending sleepovers with her friends, a regular activity shared among her close-knit group. On October 1, 1993, Polly asked her mother if she could have 2 friends, Jillian and Kate, over for a sleepover. Her mother agreed, and the 2 friends arrived at Polly's house in the afternoon. They had dinner together, and the evening went smoothly until Polly's mother went to bed around 9:45 p.m. due to a bad headache. She told the girls that she was going to sleep and asked them to wake her up if they needed any help at any time. After taking 2 sleeping pills, she fell into a deep sleep. The calm night was disrupted after 11 p.m. when Eva, Polly's mother, was jolted awake by the screams of Jillian and Kate. The 2 girls frantically told her that a man had broken into the house and taken Polly away. Eva made an emergency call to the police and then went to check on her other daughter, Annie, who was in her room, seemingly unaware of the incident. When the police arrived, they started questioning Polly's two friends, Jillian and Kate. The girls explained they were in a room, select on a Halloween costume and just having fun. As the night wore on, around 11 p.m., Polly suggested it was time to go to bed, and her friends agreed. She offered to get the inflatable bed she and her mom had set up earlier so the three could sleep together. However, when Polly opened the door to her room, a man was standing in front of them, holding a knife and not wearing a mask. Since Halloween approached, three girls initially thought man's threatening claims were a prank and burst into laughter. However, the man's facial expression quickly turned to anger, causing them to realize the situation was more serious. He swiftly forcing the girls into a room, where he bound their hands and feet with rope. When questioned about who lived in the house, all three girls, including Jillian and Kate, provided the same answer: Polly. Next, the man removed the pillowcases from the pillows and placed them over Jillian and Kate's heads, preventing them from seeing. He instructed the girls to count up to 1,000, assuring them that he would temporarily take Polly away but return her shortly. Unbeknownst to the man, the girls peered through gaps in the pillowcases and noticed his swift departure. Then, they attempted to release themselves from the restraints. After about 30 minutes of struggle, they managed to break free. Upon escaping the room, they immediately sought out Eva to inform her that her daughter Polly had been taken by the man. Jillian and Kate provided the police with a detailed account of the events. They also gave a brief description of the man, who had not worn a mask and covered his face, allowing the girls to get a clear look at him. As a result, the police were able to create a sketch of the suspect to aid in the search. The investigation at Polly's house did not yield much evidence. Several footprints were found, but they all belonged to Polly, her family members, or friends who had visited the house recently. However, some unusual fibers were discovered on the carpet, which did not match the carpet in Polly's house. Further analysis revealed that these fibers likely came from the carpet of a vehicle. The police then analyzed the cars of individuals who were known to the family and had visited the house, but none of them matched the fibers. This led to the assumption that the fibers were from the kidnapper's vehicle. A palm print was discovered at the scene. At that time, fingerprinting and DNA technology had not yet advanced to the point where it could be compared to a database. However, the print was preserved for potential future use if a suspect was later identified. In Polly's room, a piece of fabric resembling silk was also found. The fabric had a distinctive pattern and appeared to have been cut from a garment with scissors. The police believed this fabric could serve as a valuable clue in the future. A hair was discovered, but its origin remained unknown since DNA analysis was not advanced enough to thoroughly examine it at the time. Polly's case generated one of the largest searches in the United States at that time. Thousands of volunteers joined the search, with 4,000 people combing neighborhoods, vacant lots, and large estates near her home. The police also attempted to locate drivers matching the suspect's description, but all did not bring any results. The police had a narrow 24-hour window to locate Polly after her disappearance, as chances of finding her alive would significantly decrease beyond that time frame. To expedite the investigation, they handed the case over to the FBI and launched an urgent search. However, as the days went by, hopes of a safe recovery Polly began to dwindle. During the investigation, police inquired about witnesses in the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual on the night of the abduction. Several neighbors reported seeing a suspicious individual lurking around the area, describing him as peculiar looking. They didn't think much of it at the time because they had no reason to believe the man was capable of committing a serious crime like kidnapping. As a result, they failed to report the incident to the authorities. The police shared a sketch of the suspect with the neighbors, based on a description provided by Polly's friends. The neighbors all recognized the man in the sketch. In a separate investigation, The police also questioned the teachers and staff at Polly's school to see if anyone knew the man or had any information about Polly's disappearance. Unfortunately, no one at the school had any knowledge about the man or the incident surrounding Polly's disappearance. The staff members all had alibis for the time in question, and none of them matched the description or resembled the sketch of suspects. The police have conducted a thorough and comprehensive investigation of the case, they comparing a fiber found in Polly's house to the car mats of teachers and school staff vehicles, but unfortunately, no matches were found. Over time, feelings of hopelessness and fear grew, not only for Polly's family but also for the authorities and the general public. Everyone is concerned about the threat this criminal may pose to society, so they demand that the police quickly solve the case. To gather more information, a $200,000 reward was offered to anyone providing information that could aid in locating Polly. This reward was funded by actress Winona Ryder, who also held a press conference to publicly appeal kidnapper for Polly's safe return. At the time, the internet was still in its early stages, and law enforcement agencies, including the police and the FBI, were unfamiliar with using the internet to locate missing persons. To assist in the investigation, 3 individuals from California took matters into their own hands. They created and posted a picture of Polly, a sketch of her suspected kidnapper, and an advertisement for a reward for any information that could lead to her safe return. Although social media platforms did not exist at the time, other online communication tools were available. As a result, approximately 25 million people in the United States viewed Polly's picture online. Initially, FBI investigators believed that the internet could play a crucial role in the investigation. Although the disappearance became increasingly well known, but internet users do not bring any valuable information. However, this has attracted many volunteers to help, and telephone switchboards were established with hundreds of information every day. This thing also brings hope in the families of other missing children, who reached out to Polly's family to support and assistance, hoping that by working together, they might be able to find their own missing children. The investigators were growing increasingly frustrated. It has been many weeks since Polly was kidnapped, and they had yet to uncover any leads. The identity of the kidnapper remained a mystery, and without any DNA evidence, they were unable to make a match. Not even a hair or palm print had been left found, leaving them feeling helpless. Finally, a new breakthrough in the case has come. A phone call was called to Polly's father, Mark. On the other end of the line, he heard a girl's voice that sounded uncannily like his daughter's. She claimed to be Polly and told Mark that she was being held at a hotel. The kidnapper had momentarily left her alone, and that's why she was able to contact he. However, before Mark could glean any more information, the girl hung up. Mark immediately rushed to the police station to tell the news. Unfortunately, the FBI at the time lacked the advanced technology to track a call that had already been disconnected. All they could do was wait anxiously for the kidnapper to make another move, so they can only sit and wait for a new call, hoping to trace it. A few hours after the first call, the same girl who had spoken to Mark called again. The police managed to trace the call, but found it odd that the location was not a hotel, as the girl claimed, but a residential neighborhood. When officers arrived and knocked on the door of the house where the call originated, they discovered it was a prank. It turned out a teenage girl, close to Polly's age, lived there, so their voices were similar. She explained that her friends had dared her to do it. The girl was not arrested or taken to the police station. Instead, her parents were advised to monitor her behavior and remind her not to joke about such serious issues. On November 28, 1993, nearly 2 months after Polly disappeared, police received a call from a woman. She reported that she found 3 suspicious items on a several-acre plot of land she owned. The police, along with the FBI, went to the location and found 3 critical pieces of evidence: a piece of silk identical to one in Polly's room, a pair of ballet shoes that Eva claimed were missing from the house the night Polly vanished, and some duct tape. These evidence led the police to suspect that Polly might have been in the area. Before all this evidence was discovered, on the day Polly disappeared, the same woman went to the police to report a problem. Strangers had been wandering onto her plot of land. She owned a lot of land, which was mostly forest, and had only one small house inside. Although there were signs indicating it was private property, there was no fence to keep people out, so many unknowingly crossed onto her land. Although her land had many intruders, but one particular out in her memory. On the night Polly was abducted, a man drove up to her house in his car, which got stuck in the mud. The nanny, who was caring for the woman's son, was the first to notice the man but didn't approach him because she was too scared. The homeowner also didn't approach him, as she thought he looked angry. They decided to call the police. When the officers arrived, they interrogated the man about why he was there. He explained that he hadn't realized it was private property and promised to leave quickly. However, he requested their assistance in getting his car out of the mud. The officers noticed that the man seemed very nervous, scared, and sweaty, and he also appeared to be under the influence of drugs. Since they were unable to conduct a drug test at the time and the man was not acting aggressively, they were unable to arrest him. The officers helped him out of the mud, and he eventually drove away. This man was Richard Allen Davis, born in 1954 in San Francisco, California. His childhood was troubled due to the violence inflicted by his parents. When he was 12, his parents separated. His mother completely disowned him, saying she wanted nothing to do with him, and left him with his father. Richard's father was very irresponsible, often leaving the house for hours or even days. Richard was frequently left alone, sometimes staying with neighbors and sometimes staying with some of his relatives. During his teenage years, Richard began engaging in criminal activities such as stealing and fighting, which led to several months in reform school. At 17, Richard committed a violent robbery that almost resulted in the victim's death. The judge offered him a choice: go to reform school or join the U.S. Army. Richard chose the Army but was dishonorably discharged in less than 2 years. As he grew older, his criminal record grew longer. Around the age of 20, he was sentenced to 15 years for robbery and kidnapping, but was released after 1 year on parole for good behavior. During that period, Richard was troubled by another accusation. Many of his friends suspected him of killing a 19-year-old girl named Marlene, even though the police acknowledged that she had left voluntarily. However, those close to Marlene believed Richard was responsible for her death, occurring the night they attended a party together. These were merely rumors, with no evidence to support them. When Polly went missing, Richard was having a difficult time, and he had no fixed address, so his whereabouts were unclear. The police distributed a special leaflet exclusively to officers, urging them to be extremely cautious. They withheld information from the media due to concerns that Richard might flee California or even the United States. On November 13, 1993, Richard was arrested while driving under the influence of alcohol. A police officer stopped him, and he failed a breathalyzer test. Upon checking Richard's name and picture, the officer recognized him as the suspect wanted in the Polly kidnapping case. The officer carefully informed Richard that he was being arrested for violating probation due to drunk driving. Richard complied and was taken to the police station. There, officers read him his rights and revealed that he was actually being held for the kidnapping of Polly. Richard was taken in for questioning. The investigation was careful and he eventually admitted to kidnapping Polly. His palm print matched exactly with the one found at Polly's house, and carpet fibers from his car matched those found in the house. Polly's friends were brought to the police station for questioning and immediately identified Richard as the kidnapper. Additionally, A piece of silk identical to one found in Polly's room was discovered in his car and on the piece of land of the woman who reported the incident to the police. All evidence pointed to Richard, leading he to finally confess. He explained that he had been using substances with friends that day and felt unwell. He decided to break into a house in a neighborhood to commit a burglary. Richard drove around until he reached Polly's neighborhood. Seeing an open window, he entered the house. He stated that he hadn't planned the incident, didn't know Polly or her family, and hadn't been following them. He was searching for valuables but didn't find much. As he was about to leave, Polly opened the bedroom door and saw him. Richard noted that she was very frightened and, in his panic, decided to take her. He stated that he put Polly in his car and started driving, eventually stopping in a vacant lot where he assaulted her. Afterwards, he got back into the driver's seat. When the woman and the babysitter spotted Richard on private piece of land, Polly was in the back seat. Police officers helped him retrieve his car from the mud, and at that point, Polly was still alive, which deeply frustrated officers as they believed her life could have been saved. After the car was pushed out of the mud, Richard drove down the highway, strangled Polly to death, and left her body there. Richard reported the exact location of the grave to the police, leading to a search that took place on December 4, 1993, 2 months 3 days after the girl was abducted. Polly's body was found in a grave beside the highway, dug by Richard himself. The forensic examination mainly confirmed the cause of death as strangulation, consistent with Richard's account. The date of her death was approximately the same day she disappeared. With all the evidence, Richard Allen Davis was put on trial for kidnapping, murdering, and raping Polly Klaas. During the trial, Richard had a chance to speak. Besides apologizing to the family, he accused Polly's father of sexually abusing her. Richard claimed that Polly had told him not to do to her what her father did to her. This accusation enraged Polly's father, who nearly attacked Richard, but the people present compartmented him. Richard's words shocked everyone, not only because he didn't apologize but also because they doubted the truth of his claim about Polly's father. On June 18, 1996, Richard Allen Davis was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering Polly Klaas. In August, he was sentenced to death. He tried to overturn the death sentence but failed. In 2006, Richard overdosed on pills in his cell but was revived and returned to prison. In 2009, his lawyer attempted to appeal his conviction to the Supreme Court but was unsuccessful. The Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Romina Celeste Núñez Rodriguez. Romina Celeste Núñez Rodriguez was born in the fall of 1990 in Oñan, the capital of Paraguay. She was the oldest of 2 daughters in a poor working-class family. When the girls were still young, their parents divorced. Their mother, Miriam Rodriguez, had to raise them alone. She worked multiple jobs because her ex-husband did not provide any financial support and showed no interest in their well-being. When Romina was still in school, she started working to support her mother and younger sister. At 17, she entered a romantic relationship with a boy named Christopher. He courted her sweetly, and they dreamed of a future together. However, their happiness ended when Romina discovered she was pregnant and told Christopher. He responded by giving her an ultimatum that she could either have an abortion or they would break up for good. Romina was deeply wounded by her lover's words, but after talking to her parents, who she had always been close to, she made the decision to keep the baby. Her greatest fear was that having an abortion at such a young age might prevent her from ever becoming a mother in the future. Therefore, she felt she had no other option. Christopher, true to his word, ended all communication with her and showed no interest in Romina or their child's well-being. At 18, Romina gave birth to a son named Lucas. The arrival of the baby only made their already difficult financial situation worse. Money was extremely tight, and now Romina had to support her grandson too. Feeling depressed about their circumstances, she wanted to improve things and help her family, but she struggled to find a well-paying job in Paraguay. She called her aunt, who lived in sunny Spain. Her aunt invited her to come stay, saying it would be easier for Romina to settle there and that Europe offered more opportunities than Latin America. Without thinking too much, Romina packed only the essentials and bought a plane ticket to Spain. She left her 2-year-old son in the care of her mother and sister, planning to bring him to her once she found a new home and a stable job. In late summer 2010, Romina flew to Madrid and then traveled to Alcobendas, a provincial town, where she stayed at her aunt's house. She quickly started searching for a job, and luck was on her side. She secured a position as an administrator at a hotel, earning a good salary. She sent some of her earnings back home and used the rest to rent her own apartment, so as not to impose on her generous relatives. Romina soon met a man named Javier, and they entered into a tumultuous relationship. Like her, Javier had immigrated to Europe seeking happiness and a better life. He was originally from El Salvador, worked in construction, and appeared to be a serious individual. However, when Romina became pregnant, Javier was once again unprepared for the responsibility of parenthood. Despite this, they attempted to live together for a time. Unfortunately, shortly after their son was born, they ultimately separated. Romina found herself in a challenging situation, stranded in a foreign country with a newborn and unsure of what to do next. For a time, she returned to her aunt's house, where she received support and assistance. When the boy was about 6 months old, Romina returned to work because she couldn't afford to stay home. A few months later, she faced another shock. She had been ignoring her poor health and weakness, thinking they were just due to stress and fatigue. However, when Romina finally visited the doctor, she received a cancer diagnosis. She underwent several rounds of chemotherapy, lost her hair, and lost a significant amount of weight, but ultimately triumphed over the disease. After her treatment, she quickly recovered, continued working, and used wigs to cover her hair loss. Romina believed that after enduring such difficult challenges, a period of happiness was on the horizon. She saved money and planned to take her eldest son, along with her mother and sister, on a trip to Spain. In the summer of 2017, Romina attended an event with friends where she met a man named Raul Diaz. He was attractive, impressive, had a stable job, and was financially secure. Raul was drawn to Romina's beauty and began asking mutual friends about her. Romina was equally interested in Raul, and when he invited her on a date, she happily accepted. Raul was nearly 15 years older than Romina and worked as a lead process engineer at a large energy company. He had been through 2 divorces and had 2 teenage daughters from previous relationships, but Romina was not bothered by the age gap. Similarly, she was also a single mother, raising sons from her own 2 past relationships. After just one date, they quickly realized they were in love and didn't want to be apart. Romina, filled with excitement, enthusiastically shared her happiness with friends. Her new partner showered her with small gifts and thoughtful surprises nearly every day, organized romantic outings, sent flowers with heartfelt messages, and offered her compliments. Romina felt she had finally found true love and a man who would accept her and her sons. However, she soon began to hear unsettling rumors about him. People claimed that he had been rude and even cruel to his former wives, which had led to the end of both his marriages. Despite this, Romina didn't want to believe the rumors, although she noticed that Raul had no contact with either his ex-wives or his daughters. Despite their significant age difference and the presence of children from previous relationships, the couple did not let these factors stand in their way. Just 6 months after they met, they chose to move in together in a luxurious villa on Lanzarote, one of the Canary Islands. To Romina, this place felt like paradise, but her happiness was short-lived. Raul, who initially seemed like the perfect partner, soon revealed a controlling side. At first, they lived with Romina's youngest son, and Raul made an effort to take care of the child. Romina even believed he would be a great father to her boys. Raul promised her a long and happy life together, assuring her that he would take care of her and the children. Romina, deeply in love, trusted his words and eagerly accepted his proposal to marry him. However, Raul insisted they needed time alone together to fully enjoy their relationship before the wedding. Raul not only wanted to take Romina's eldest child from Paraguay, but he also hoped to distance himself from her youngest son. Despite this, Romina trusted her partner and ignored warnings from her friends who noticed his odd behavior. In June 2018, Raul purchased tickets for Romina and her child to travel to Paraguay, along with a return ticket solely for Romina. When she returned home and shared details about her partner, her mother and sister became uneasy about Raul's intentions. They suspected he simply wanted to get rid of her children. Romina was hurt by their comments and ended up having a small argument with her family. A few days later, she flew back to Spain, promising to return for the boys in the fall. When Romina got back, she received a warm welcome, and for 2 months, she was happily alone with Raul. However, in August, just a few days before the wedding, Raul violently attacked Romina. This was a shocking experience for her, but he pleaded for her forgiveness on his knees, assuring her that it would never happen again, and she chose to believe him. Romina did not report the incident or tell anyone about it. On August 10th, she attended the wedding with makeup covering her bruises, unaware that the man she was marrying would soon take her life. 2 weeks after the wedding, the girl returned to Paraguay, not to pick up her sons as she had initially planned, but to visit her family. Her mother and sister were confused by the changes they noticed in her since they last saw each other. Romina appeared upset and disoriented. She walked with a noticeable limp and had bruises on her neck, which she tried to cover with a scarf. When asked about her condition, Romina either remained silent or claimed she had hurt herself accidentally. She stayed at home for nearly a month, which surprised her relatives since she had just gotten married. Romina explained that her husband had suggested she visit her children because she missed them. Miriam praised her son-in-law for being generous, but she still couldn't understand why her daughter seemed so unhappy. In mid-September, Romina secretly borrowed money from her relatives to buy a return ticket to Spain because her husband refused to pay for it. This should have been a clear sign that returning was not a good idea, yet Romina still hoped for a happy resolution to their marriage. On September 17th, at the airport, her mother, sister, and sons saw her for the last time. After returning to her husband, Romina's life began to feel like a nightmare. Raul, who was using illegal drugs, no longer hid his addiction from her. When under the influence, he became aggressive and emotionally abused Romina. Each time she tried to leave, he promised to change and insisted that it wouldn't happen again. After the beatings and threats, there were often brief periods when Romina's husband would become loving and caring again, showering her with gifts and planning romantic outings. However, these peaceful moments became shorter over time, and instances of violence occurred more frequently. Just before the new year, Romina confided in her best friend that she feared her husband and worried he might eventually kill her. On December 29th, Raul beat her so severely that she had to seek medical attention. The hospital staff noticed something was wrong and considered calling the police to report the incident. At that moment, Raul arrived and insisted that Romina had simply fallen and that there was no need to involve the authorities. Romina went along with his story, declined hospitalization, and returned home with him. On January 1, 2019, Miriam, Romina's mother, repeatedly tried to call her daughter, but Romina did not answer. Concerned, Miriam then called her son-in-law to check on Romina, but he also did not answer. After several days of no contact, Miriam sent Raul a message indicating she would go to the police for help. This prompted Raul to quickly return her call, explaining that he and Romina had a fight on December 31st, after which she left with her belongings. He reassured Miriam that Romina would be okay and would return home soon, as this had happened before. Miriam, however, doubted Raul's explanation and felt something was wrong with her daughter. She insisted that Raul report the situation to the police. Finally, on January 8th, pressured by Romina's family, Raul reported her disappearance. This time, he altered his story slightly, claiming that after their quarrel, Romina had taken some money from him and suggested that she might have gone to Paraguay to see the children, which is why he was not too worried before he heard from Miriam. What was Raul hiding? His testimony was filled with confusion and contradictions, raising many questions and suspicions. As a result, law enforcement decided to investigate the couple's life. After speaking with friends and family, they discovered that the marriage was far from perfect. Romina had often complained to loved ones about her husband's abuse, though she never provided details. Others frequently noticed bruises and injuries on her body. The police decided to place Raul under covert surveillance, tapping his phone conversations. However, Raul seemed to sense that he was being monitored and acted very cautiously, avoiding any behavior that might raise suspicion. Despite this, the investigation continued, and it was soon revealed that Romina had visited the hospital on December 29th with signs of severe beating. Her husband almost forcibly took her from the hospital, preventing her from going to the police. A few months ago, Romina filed a report for domestic violence but retracted it the following day. A week later, Raul, having calmed down somewhat, made a phone call to a relative in the police and carelessly mentioned that his wife was no longer alive and that her body would never be found. This statement prompted police to arrest him as the primary suspect and interrogate him thoroughly. Raul claimed that on New Year's Eve, his wife had been drinking heavily and started to argue with him. She demanded that he bring their children to live with them. When he said he wasn't ready for that, she had a violent outburst, started fighting, and began throwing things at him. Raul stated that he left his house for a few hours until things calmed down. Upon returning, he discovered Romina in the bathtub, unresponsive. He suggested that she had suffocated due to excessive drinking but was worried he might be suspected of her death or accused of murder. To protect himself, Raul decided to erase all evidence and report her as missing. Everyone was shocked by his admission of how he disposed of her body. He claimed he burned Romina's body on a barbecue in the backyard. Living in a luxury complex with a spacious area, he thought the neighbors wouldn't notice what he was doing or smell the burning flesh. However, he underestimated the situation because the barbecue did not function like a crematorium, and her remains were not fully burned after several hours. He then removed the body from the fire, cut it into parts, and put the pieces into separate bags. A few days later, he rented a car to transport the dismembered body to a remote and desolate area of the island, where he discarded the bags into the sea from the cliffs. The police spent weeks searching the shoreline and surrounding areas based on Raul's statements about where he had thrown his wife's remains. Divers and many volunteers participated in the search for body fragments underwater, but none of their efforts produced any findings. Meanwhile, on January 16th, Raul was officially charged with domestic violence and the murder of his wife. This development followed a detailed search of his home, which utilized specialized equipment and luminol. This search uncovered multiple traces of washed blood in different rooms. Investigators discovered that Raul had been ordering caustic soda online, a substance used for removing organic materials and paint. In one of the second-floor rooms, he had scrubbed a bloody stain on the floor so aggressively that he damaged it and then attempted to cover it up with paint. According to investigators, this is the room where Raul dismembered his wife's body. Additionally, a broken piece of Romina's fingernail was found on the floor, which had traces of blood and Raoul's skin cells, suggesting that she may have been alive and fought back during the incident. Also in the bathroom, investigators discovered Romina's contact lens stuck to the wall, possibly from a strong impact to her face. Despite extensive searching, law enforcement could not find any other remains. Meanwhile, a tourist called to report a lung fragment he found on the beach. He was unsure if it was from a human or an animal, but knowing that authorities were looking for a body in the area, he reported his discovery. By the end of February, forensic analysis confirmed that the lung fragment belonged to Romina. Raoul continued to claim his innocence despite the evidence and examination results. He maintained his original belief that the woman had drowned in a bathtub while heavily intoxicated, even though evidence suggested there had been a violent struggle. He also stated that he did not use any tools to dismember the body. Instead, he claimed to have tried to burn it completely on a barbecue, asserting that the remains fell apart due to the heat, and he then placed them in bags to dispose of. This account was false for several reasons. First, the body of the adult Romina could not have fit in the fixture in his yard. Second, bones cannot become so fragile from fire that they fall apart without tools. Additionally, separating the lung from the body would require opening the chest, which cannot be done with bare hands. The investigation could not determine exactly how Raoul killed his wife, but the evidence of a struggle in their home suggested that he may have beaten her to death. It was clear that Raoul dismembered her body in the same room where he later repainted the floor to hide the blood. Eventually, faced with overwhelming evidence, he admitted that he accidentally killed his wife during a fight, contradicting his earlier claim that he found her dead in the bathtub. Despite his claims that she was drunk and violent, the defendant was found guilty in June 2023. Romina's family felt the sentence was too lenient. He received a 12.5-year sentence for involuntary manslaughter, 2 years for confirmed domestic violence, and 1 year for causing serious bodily harm to Romina in December 2018 when she was hospitalized. He also received several months for bodily abuse. In total, the combined punishment was less than 16 years in prison. Raoul is currently serving his sentence while simultaneously trying to appeal the court's decision. The story of Romina Celeste Núñez Rodriguez serves as a poignant reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic violence and the complex struggles faced by individuals seeking a better life. Despite her resilience and efforts to overcome adversity, Romina became a victim of a controlling and abusive relationship, ultimately leading to her untimely demise. The court's lenient verdict against her perpetrator reflects the ongoing challenges in addressing domestic violence, leaving her family and loved ones grappling with their loss and advocating for justice. As we reflect on Romina's case, it is crucial to continue raising awareness about the importance of supporting victims and holding abusers accountable to prevent such tragedies in the future. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sydney Luff. Sydney Irene Luff was born on August 21, 1993, in Broken Bow, Nebraska. She grew up in Arcadia with her parents, George and Susie Luff. In 2000, when she was in second grade, her family moved to Norfolk. Her mother, Susie, worked as a special education teacher, and her father, George, was a school principal. Sydney was an active child and enjoyed a happy childhood filled with a love of nature. She loved fishing, an activity her father often took her to do. During her school years, she participated in basketball and golf, and showed outstanding potential in both sports. However, she developed scoliosis, which affected the curvature of her spine and forced her to give up many of her favorite hobbies and sports. In 2011, after finishing high school, Sydney began working at a Menards store that focused on home improvement products. The Luff family was very attached, and when Sydney needed to move from Norfolk to Lincoln for her job, they all made an effort to stay in touch nearly every day and often gathered for dinner. Although Sydney lived on her own, she frequently returned to her parents' house. Recently, however, she had been dealing with depression and felt that her medications were not helping, but rather worsening her condition. Susie, concerned for her daughter, recommended a new doctor who prescribed different medications for her. During phone calls with her mom, Sydney expressed that she was starting to feel normal again, sounding quite optimistic. She was trying to make positive changes in her life and was searching for a new job. Working in a store wasn't her ultimate goal. She felt there was more out there for her. However, she was uncertain about her career path and what she truly wanted, which contributed to her feelings of depression. In November 2017, Sydney's mental health worsened, leading her to start taking antidepressants and occasionally smoke marijuana. Although her family and friends were very supportive, but she was looking for more than just companionship. She wanted love. Being young and modern, Sydney was interested in women, so she often searched for dates on social media. She used Tinder, an app that helps people connect for dating, to find friends and romantic interests. During that month, she matched with a girl named Audrey, who responded to her message. They began chatting and discovered they shared many interests, including gambling, hiking, and enjoying good food. After exchanging about 100 messages, Sydney and Audrey decided to meet in person on November 14th. Sydney traveled to Audrey's house in Wilbur, and their first meeting was a success, leaving Sydney very happy. They enjoyed each other's company and agreed to meet again at Audrey's house on November 15th. After finishing her shift at the store, Sydney went home to get ready. She cleaned up, styled her hair, and did her makeup before heading out. She took a selfie and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for date." Shortly after posting, she received a message from Audrey, who was waiting for her in the car. The following day, Sydney failed to arrive at work. Her family, who had noticed her recent happiness due to a new friend, became worried. When her co-workers reported her absence, they were surprised, as this behavior was uncharacteristic of their responsible daughter. Susie mentioned that Sydney had been struggling with anxiety and severe depression. Just days before she went missing, Sydney had spoken with her family about her worsening mental health, and they had recommended that she see a doctor to resume her antidepressant medication. That was the last time her family saw her. Sydney's parents visited her apartment and were shocked to find that Sydney had left her beloved cat, Mimsy, without food or water. This was very unusual for Sydney, as they knew how much she cared for her cat and never left it alone for long periods. Worried for her well-being, they reported Sydney missing to the police. The apartment was locked, and when the police conducted a welfare check, they found nothing unusual. However, the family insisted that something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, a 5 feet 7 inches blonde named Sydney was reported missing after not showing up for her shift at the Menards store located at 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. She had a spinal condition that affected her walking, making her easily recognizable. When she went missing, she was wearing a white Columbia jacket and a cream-colored shirt. Her parents told the police that earlier that week, on Wednesday morning, Sydney had shared on Snapchat that she had gone on a date with a woman she met online the previous Tuesday night and planned to see her again that Wednesday evening. Sydney's car was found in Northeast Lincoln, and the police are interviewing people and searching for any clues about her or her location. Her family has been handing out flyers suggesting she may have been abducted 40 miles southwest of Lincoln, where her cell phone last connected. The flyers also mentioned that there has been no activity in her bank account and that her phone was turned off the night she went missing. The flyers included a description of Sydney and highlighted her notable features, such as several tattoos, one on her arm that says, "Everything will be great someday," yin yang symbol beneath her elbow, and the word "believe" on her wrist. Anyone who has information about Sydney's location is encouraged to contact the police by phone. A massive search for Sydney was launched. Billboards were placed on freeways with her picture. A manhunt was also broadcast on television news. Sydney's mother, Susie, continued to assert that something had happened to her daughter after that date. To support her this thing, she shared a screenshot of a Snapchat post from Sydney that included her picture and the caption, "Ready for date." Sydney's friends also confirmed that she was going on a date with a woman named Audrey, whom she had met through Tinder. During the investigation, police examined Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from her workplace. They quickly identified a person of interest. The last time Sydney's phone was used, it connected to a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, likely close to Audrey's home. However, the police did not know who Audrey was. They started looking for a woman named Audrey, the last individual to see Sydney alive, but they faced challenges in locating her because no one knew her real name. Sydney's friend Brooklyn stepped in to help the police by searching for Audrey on Tinder. After downloading the app, she located Audrey and they exchanged phone numbers. This led the police to discover that Audrey's real name was 26-year-old Bailey Boswell. They also found out that Bailey lived near the cell tower where Sydney's phone was last connected. Additionally, it was revealed that Bailey shared her apartment with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. Bailey and Aubrey are two individuals with contrasting backgrounds. Bailey Boswell was raised in a typical family in Lyons, Iowa. As a child, she was sociable and performed well academically, also finding success in basketball and running. However, after the death of her father, her life took a different turn. Following her high school graduation, Bailey fell into a troubling lifestyle that involved alcohol and drugs. It was during this time that she met Aubrey on a dating website. Aubrey Trail had a problematic history, facing several fraud charges, including writing bad checks and theft. He established a cult where he referred to himself as Vampire Daddy and paid women $200 a week to adhere to his strange rules. When Sydney disappeared, Aubrey and Bailey were court-ordered to pay over $40,000 due to their fraud cases, and they had multiple misdemeanors. Despite this, the couple was able to evade the authorities. On November 19, 2017, after a warrant was issued, police conducted a search of Bailey in Aubrey's home. During the search, they found that some walls had been scrubbed with bleach. A neighbor confirmed this, stating they had noticed a strong smell of bleach 2 days earlier. After that, the police made more efforts to find the suspects. While evading capture, Bailey and Aubrey posted videos on Facebook denying any involvement in Sydney's disappearance and expressing their hope for her safe return. Bailey mentioned that she had gone on 2 dates with Sydney but had dropped her off at a friend's house, after which she never heard from Sydney again. Bailey added that she just wanted Sydney's family to know that she was really sorry, but she had nothing to do with it. She hoped that Sydney would be found very soon, as Sydney was a lovely, amazing girl. After several days, the police tracked down Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail at a hotel in Branson, Missouri. They were arrested weeks after Sydney was reported missing. Through a detailed analysis of phone records and Bailey's location history, investigators found Sydney's remains, which had been dismembered into 14 pieces. 13 of these body parts were discovered in black plastic garbage bags in ditches in Clay County, with some of her part, such as her heart, missing. The situation was horrific. In total, 16 crime scenes were connected to Sydney's remains or her personal belongings, including her car keys, driver's license, and phone case, which were found along the highway. These locations were consistent with the suspects' movements, Bailey and Aubrey. Forensic experts performed autopsies on the 13 body parts that were found. They found abrasions on Sydney's wrists, a bump on her head, torn earlobes, and various bruises, contusions on her back. These injuries suggested that Sydney had struggled to defend herself. The tragic finding devastated not only Sydney's family and friends but also the entire community of Nebraska. On December 11, 2017, the Luff family held a private funeral for Sydney at her lifelong Lutheran church. Bailey and Aubrey faced charges of first-degree murder, improper disposal of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all charges, while Aubrey pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy but admitted guilt regarding the improper disposal of human remains. Aubrey's testimonies were inconsistent. Each time he spoke, he appeared increasingly confused, altering his statements and introducing new elements and characters into the story. After his arrest, Aubrey spoke to the police about the cult that he and Bailey belonged to. He discussed witchcraft and claimed that he was a vampire capable of flying. Aubrey presented himself as the cult leader and insisted that there were witches in the group who needed to kill another woman to gain powers. During one of Aubrey's early court hearings, he confessed to killing Sydney but insisted it was an accident. Aubrey explained that he paid Sydney $5,000 to fulfill a fantasy with 2 other women. Sydney agreed to this, but she tragically died during the encounter when he accidentally strangled her with a cord. Aubrey admitted to dismembering the body Sydney as part of a ritual tied to his religious beliefs. He said he needed to drain her blood to free her soul for the gods in a sacred location and arranged her body parts to aid in her reincarnation. However, this account was proven to be false. Surveillance footage from November 14 captured Bailey and Aubrey checking into a hotel in Lincoln, close to Sydney's residence. The following day, November 15, they went to a home improvement store, where they were seen purchasing a disturbing selection of tools: a hacksaw, bleach, a folding saw, a utility knife, and bags intended for Sydney's remains. On November 15 at 12:01 p.m., a surveillance camera recorded Sydney and Aubrey crossing paths at the Menards store during business hours. At that moment, Sydney did not know who Aubrey was or how their lives would become intertwined in a tragic way. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing took place regarding the murder and improper burial of Sydney's remains. The court ordered separate trials for the defendants, Bailey and Aubrey, although the charges against them were essentially the same. The trials were held in Lexington because the attorneys argued that Bailey and Aubrey would not receive a fair trial in Wilbur due to the extensive media coverage of the case. The prosecution argued that Sydney was murdered through strangulation in a premeditated attack. Aubrey and Bailey were identified as the leaders of a group that recruited young women into intimate activities. To find these women, Bailey used Tinder. During the trial, the jury heard from 3 other women who had previously been in relationships with Aubrey and Bailey, and they shared that they also met these men on Tinder. All of these women had been involved with Bailey and had engaged in intimate activities with both Bailey and Aubrey. One woman testified that she traveled with Aubrey and was given a weekly allowance of $200. She claimed he invited her to join his cult, which he referred to as involving witches. To join, he told her she would need to torture and kill someone. She also mentioned that Bailey was called the Witch Queen. Another woman added that Bailey often talked about breaking her fingers and expressed a desire to dismember bodies. All 3 women emphasized that both Bailey and Aubrey actively participated in these discussions about torture and criminal acts. It is surprising that in today's world, some people still believe in the terrifying concept of exorcism and try to persuade others of its validity. The prosecution reviewed the investigation and the evidence gathered to piece together what happened on the tragic evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney was preparing for a date with a woman she had recently met through Tinder. Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment, and they started driving in Bailey's car. Eventually, they arrived at Bailey's house, where Sydney was drawn into the apartment. As soon as she entered, Bailey and Aubrey attacked her and strangled her with an extension cord on the living room floor. Bailey and Aubrey then cleaned the apartment thoroughly, an action the prosecution claimed was planned in advance. They subsequently dismembered Sydney and disposed of her remains in Clay County. The next day, on November 16th, the court heard from their landlord, Jennifer Cull. She testified that when she drove into the garage, she noticed a strong smell of chlorine, which became more intense when she entered the house. The medical examiner concluded that Sydney's death was a homicide caused by asphyxiation. Toxicology reports revealed that Sydney had antidepressants in her system. The court discovered that, in addition to the missing parts, Sydney's upper left arm, specifically the section above the elbow and below the shoulder, was also unaccounted for. Prosecutors have recommended the death penalty for the two suspects. They have also said they will review the case if the verdict is deemed unfair. Meanwhile, Aubrey again denied any involvement in occult activities and only admitted to improperly burying the remains. During his trial, he exclaimed that Bailey was not involved in Sydney's death, shouting, "Bailey is innocent, damn you all." Then, he attempted to end his life by slashing his throat 3 times with a razor blade. However, he survived and was placed in custody until he fully recovered. Aubrey did not attend court for several weeks after that. The next time he appeared was during the defense phase, specifically when he was scheduled to testify. When he entered the courtroom, he smirked and told the judge, "He will be good." It's uncommon for defendants to testify in their own trials, as defense attorneys often advise against it. This is because testifying can lead to complications during cross-examination. Some defendants may reveal too much information, struggle to answer questions clearly, or become confrontational with attorneys, which can negatively influence jurors. However, in Aubrey's case, his situation was different since he had many interactions with the police following his arrest. Aubrey had initially shared his account of incident with the police, but during the trial, he wanted to change his story. He chose to skip most of the trial and only attended the final hearing, where his noticeable scars were evident. When he testified in his defense, Aubrey shocked his attorneys by admitting that he had previously lied to both the authorities and his legal team regarding the death of Sydney. In his testimony, he confessed that he met Sydney in March 2017 and paid her to take part in his illegal activities because she was in need of money. He claimed they lost contact, but in November 2017, he reached out to Sydney again. She needed money, and Aubrey explained that this was the reason he was at Menards that day. On November 15th, Aubrey offered to pay Sydney $55,000 to she join his antiques gang. Later that night, Aubrey, Bailey, and Sydney became intimate, but unfortunately, Sydney accidentally choked to death due to an extension cord used during their activities. Aubrey stated that he didn't know if Sydney had a seizure or something. But that was when she stopped breathing. In court, he clarified that there was no ritual involved in dismembering Sydney's body and that claims about witches, vampires, and blood-sucking were false. Aubrey admitted that he had only dismembered Sydney because he couldn't fit her body in the car. Aubrey stated that he panicked and discarded Sydney's body in a field in Clay County at dawn on November 16th. When questioned about why he didn't seek help if Sydney's death was accidental, he claimed that no one would believe him. Aubrey confessed to disposing of Sydney's body but insisted that her death was accidental, occurring while they were playing with an extension cord. During Bailey's trial, she did not admit to any wrongdoing. In fact, her lawyers argued that she was also a victim of Aubrey. Her attorney told the court that when she met Aubrey, she was a vulnerable young woman, living alone and working as a waitress in Princeton, Missouri. The defense claimed that Bailey was not involved in Sydney's death or the handling of her remains. But this turned out to be untrue. Bailey's cell phone, which she used to access her Tinder account, was located near where Sydney's body parts were discovered. Through a thorough examination of Bailey's phone and location data, police were able to locate all of Sydney's remains. The court also found out that Bailey was the one who reached out to Sydney and set up a meeting. Bailey drove to Sydney's to pick her up on the evening of November 15th. The prosecution informed the court that Bailey found pleasure in discussing cruelty and enjoyed conversations about torture with Aubrey. Evidence presented during the trial indicated that a crime had been planned. On the day of Sydney's murder, Aubrey and Bailey were together at a store where they purchased tools such as a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter from Home Depot. Around noon that day, Bailey sent Sydney a text asking how her day was going. Phone records and surveillance footage confirmed that Bailey was in the Menards parking lot with Aubrey when she sent this message on Tinder. Despite working at Menards, but it seems that Sydney did not realize Bailey was there. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney a message on Tinder, said that her was at her apartment and would pick Sydney up soon. However, phone records reveal that instead of going on a date, they went to the apartment where Bailey and Aubrey lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that the evidence indicated Bailey had bought bleach in garbage bags for the purpose of disposing of Sydney's body. This could result in charges of aiding and abetting the improper disposal of human remains. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison. The Love family has been searching for justice for 3 years, grieving the loss of their beloved daughter, Sydney. They hoped for a judgment that would bring them some peace. On July 11, 2019, a jury took less than 3 hours to find Aubrey Trail guilty of planning a murder and improperly disposing of human remains. The 3 judges described his actions as cold and calculated. In the second part of the trial, which determined his punishment, the county prosecutors fulfilled their commitment and secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail. Consequently, he was executed by lethal injection on June 9, 2021. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Petit family. The Petit family was viewed as a model family, meeting everyone's expectations with their stable financial situation and outstanding children. They earned admiration from the community. The father, William Petit, grew up in Connecticut and excelled in many sports during high school, especially basketball, where he demonstrated natural leadership. Beyond his athletic talents, he was also the top student in his class, earning a law degree from Dartmouth University. However, William discovered that his true passion was not in law. He wanted to help others, care for the sick, and making the world a better place. After graduating, he chose to pursue a career in medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. During his 3rd year of residency at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, William met Jennifer Hawk, a nurse in the oncology department and medical center co-director of a pre-graduation internship program. They quickly fell in love, and those around them believed they were a perfect match. They married in 1985, and 4 years later, they welcomed their first daughter, Haley. Then, they to buy a house in Cheshire, Connecticut. On November 17, 1995, their second daughter, Michaela, was born. After recovering from childbirth, Jennifer resumed her role as a nurse and co-director of the internship. Unfortunately, she later developed multiple sclerosis, an incurable condition that she fought for the rest of her life. During her struggle with the disease, her family was always by her side and supported her. At 10 years old, their old daughter, Haley, started raising money for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, successfully gathering big funds over the years. Michaela was also a strong student and intended to take over the fundraising when her old sister went to college. She spent the summer learning to cook and loved making meals for her family. Sadly, this everyday activity would ultimately lead the family to a tragic meeting with their attacker. In July 2007, Michaela was making dinner for her family, but then she realized she needed more ingredients. She and her mother went to the nearest market to shop. At the same time, Joshua, had been released from prison, was also at the market. Joshua had a troubled childhood, and a week after birth, he was given up for adoption. The Komisarjevsky family, known for their artistic achievements in Europe, adopted him. They were a strict and religious family. Despite having a high IQ, Joshua struggled in school, which led his adoptive parents to let him homeschool. During his trial, he revealed that he had been sexually abused by a cousin when he was a child, but his family opted to keep this a secret. This experience shaped his rebellious and rampant behavior. At the age of 14, Joshua Komisarjevsky was accused of abusing his sister, and around this time, he committed his first burglary. In 2002, he was arrested on 18 charges of burglary, leading to a 9-year prison sentence. He was released on parole in 2007 when he was 27 years old. Officials deemed him a danger to society, describing him as a calculating criminal with perverted tendencies. Despite these warnings, the jury found him fit for release. After his release, Joshua lived in a halfway house for ex-convicts, where he met his accomplice, Stephen Hayes. Hayes had spent much of his life in prison, beginning his incarceration at the age of 16 in 1980. Throughout the years, he was often arrested for violent robbery and burglary. He was sentenced in 2004 and granted parole in 2006, which brought him to the same halfway house where he met Joshua. Returning to the night of July 22, 2007, when Michaela was cooking dinner for her family when she realized she needed more ingredients. She asked her mother to take her to the nearest market. Unbeknownst to them, Joshua was watching taking note of everything, the type of car they drove, their appearances, and Michaela's blonde hair. After shopping, Michaela and Jennifer returned home, still unaware that someone was following them. Soon after, Stephen sent a text to Joshua expressing his eagerness to get started and mentioning that he needed a margarita. Stephen followed up by asking if they were still on, to which Joshua affirmed that they were. Meanwhile, Joshua secretly followed Michaela and Jennifer in his car, finding out where they lived before leaving the area. The family enjoyed what appeared to be a calm and normal dinner, unaware that it would be their last together. In the early morning, while everyone else was asleep, William was dozing in the living room. Their peace was suddenly disrupted by strange noises in the house. William suddenly felt groggy, in pain, and unable to think clearly. Two intruders, Joshua and Stephen, had come in through an unlocked door with the intention of robbing the family. They found a baseball bat and began to beat William. He heard one of the attackers say, "If he moves, shoot him." Afterward, William was bound with zip ties. Joshua and Stephen used ties to restrain William and bind him to a pole in the basement. They then went upstairs to find Haley's room, where she was sleeping. Haley and Michaela were tied by their hands and feet to their bedposts, with pillowcases over their heads. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Jennifer was also asleep. The intruders quietly entered her room and woke her up. They tied her hands and feet, showing their control over the situation. Joshua and Stephen carefully searched the house, even taking time to smoke cigarettes in the living room. After gathering jewelry, cash, and other valuables, they prepared to leave. However, a petit family nightmare was just beginning. After selling the stolen items at a pawn shop and realizing they hadn't made as much money as they hoped, Joshua and Stephen, driven by greed, decided to return to the house. They discovered a check register containing $40,000 and plotted to steal $155,000. Before going back, they also filled a couple of gasoline cans, as captured by surveillance cameras. Once back at the house, they threatened Jennifer, saying they would kill her entire family if she didn't help them. Fearing for family's safety, Jennifer reluctantly agreed to go with Stephen to the bank the next morning. Meanwhile, Joshua exploited Jennifer's absence, he entering Michaela's room, untying her, and attempting to undress her. He took photos with his cell phone and assaulted her, recording the act. Afterward, he took her to the bathroom to clean her, ensuring no DNA evidence was left behind. He then ordered her to put her pajamas back on and tied her up again. Evidence of Joshua's assault on Michaela was found during her autopsy, where state medical examiner Dr. Wayne Carver discovered his DNA in her body. At the bank, everything seemed normal, but Stephen did not notice Jennifer's actions while they waited in line. Before reaching the teller, she wrote a note on a flyer asking for help. The note stated that her name was Jennifer Hawk Petit and that she needed to withdraw $115,000 from her savings account. She mentioned that her family was in danger and requested that the police be called, or they would be killed. Despite Jennifer not having any identification, the teller decided to give her the money. With the cash in hand, Jennifer left the bank to return to the car with Stephen. Meanwhile, the bank employee quickly called the police to report the situation. Meanwhile, at the house, Joshua disclosed to Stephen what he had done to Michaela, implying he could easily do the same to Jennifer. Then, Stephen restrained Jennifer by pushing her to the ground and began to undress her. William, upstairs, could hear his wife being assaulted and shouted for help. He then overheard one of the attackers say, "Don't worry, it will all be over in a couple of minutes." William managed to free himself and crawled to the basement stairs, eventually making it to the backyard. Joshua went to check on William but discovered that he had escaped. In her confession, Stephen mentioned that while Joshua was assaulting Jennifer on the living room floor, he entered and revealed that William had fled. Upon hearing this, Stephen strangled Jennifer to death while continuing his assault on her. Soon after, William began shouting for help. His neighbor, unable to recognize him because of his injuries, called 911. Realizing that the police would soon arrive, Joshua and Stephen decided to destroy any evidence. They poured gasoline on Jennifer's lifeless body and around the house, including the daughter's bedrooms. Investigators later found traces of gasoline on the beds of Haley, Michaela, and on the clothes they were wearing. Joshua and Stephen set the house on fire and tried to escape, not knowing that police had already blocked the road a few miles ahead. They crashed into a police vehicle, and within 5 minutes, they were surrounded by officers, pulled from their car, and arrested. They were quickly identified as former convicts. The fire in the house was spreading quickly. An ambulance arrived and took the seriously injured father, William, to the nearest hospital. Soon after, firefighters fought to put out the flames. When they put out the flames succeeded, they were met with a terrible scene. The first body they found was Jennifer, who was completely burnt with remnants of rope around her ankles. On the second floor, they discovered Michaela, who was tied to her bed and had been entirely trapped by the fire. Surprisingly, Haley had managed to escape her bindings and tried to flee but collapsed just a few meters away after inhaling too much smoke. William managed to free himself from his restraints, leave the house, and crawled to a neighbor's yard for help. The neighbor did not recognize him at first because of his severe injuries. Both Joshua and Stephen admitted to the murders. Detectives reported that Stephen smelled of gasoline during her interrogation. Each suspect accused the other of being the leader and planner of the home invasion. Joshua also placed blame on William for the murder. In Joshua's diary, which was later presented as evidence, he referred to William as a coward and claimed that William could have saved his family if he wanted to. Stephen's trial started on September 13, 2010, with a jury composed of 7 women and 5 men. The defense claimed that Joshua was the main leader behind the crime. Conversely, prosecutors argued that both Joshua and Stephen were equally accountable. On October 5, after approximately 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Stephen Hayes guilty. The sentencing phase commenced on October 18, in which the jury was initially torn over whether to recommend life imprisonment or the death penalty. Stephen's defense claimed that life imprisonment without parole would be a harsher punishment. On November 8, the jury recommended a death sentence for Stephen on all 6 capital felony charges. Stephen had earlier tried to negotiate a plea deal for a life sentence, but instead, prosecutors sought the death penalty. On December 2, 2010, Stephen Hayes, the defendant, expressed his remorse for the pain he caused the Petit family. He mentioned that death would be a relief for him and hoped it would provide peace and comfort to those he had harmed. Judge John Blues sentenced him to death 6 times, along with an additional 106 years for other offenses. However, in August 2015, Stephen's death sentence was converted to life imprisonment after Connecticut abolished the death penalty. Joshua Komisarjevsky's trial began on September 19, 2011. His lawyers proposed a plea deal where he would plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence. However, the prosecutors were aiming for the death penalty, arguing that Joshua was a troubled individual who had been influenced by Stephen. On October 13, 2011, Joshua was found guilty, and on December 9, 2011, the jury recommended the death penalty. During sentencing, he expressed his shame and regret over the crime, asserting that he never meant to kill anyone. Judge Blues scheduled Joshua's execution for July 20, 2012, acknowledging his involvement in the crime. However, in August 2015, Connecticut abolished the death penalty, and Joshua's sentence was changed from death to life imprisonment, just like Stephen's sentence. The trials and sentencing of Stephen and Joshua marked a significant and troubling time in Connecticut's legal history. The severe nature of their crimes and the emotional toll on everyone involved, including jurors, revealed the difficulties the legal system faces in dealing with such heinous acts. William is the only person in the family to survive this tragic incident. After spending 4 days in the hospital, he was released to attend his family's funeral. Struggling with the guilt of not being able to save the lives of his wife and children, he founded an organization to support children and young victims of violence, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars to aid there. Later, he joined the Republican Party and entered politics, eventually becoming a state representative. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Ada Betty Cuadros Fernandez. Ada Betty Cuadros Fernandez was born on September 13, 1977, in the coastal town of Chimbote, Peru. She was the first child of Victor Cuadros, a veterinarian, and Fernandez, a teacher. Ada was the eldest of 4 siblings and consistently performed well academically, even winning knowledge contests. She had a happy childhood filled with dreams of self-improvement. Ada later recounted that she spent much of her childhood with one of her sisters on their grandparents' farm, enjoying the close connection with nature and animals. This period on the farm was one of the happiest times of her life. Ada came from a family that was not poor but also not wealthy. As a teenager, she looked for ways to contribute financially to her family. Together with her sister and a friend, she formed a group to entertain at children's parties. After high school, Ada enrolled in a private university to study law. However, her financial situation did not allow her to continue, and she had to drop out. Despite this setback, Ada remained determined to succeed and support her family. With this goal in mind, she applied for a U.S. visa. Like many young people from Peru and other Latin American countries, Ada saw the United States as a land of opportunities. She was determined to move there, work hard, earn a better income, and pave the way for a brighter future for herself and her family. Her family enthusiastically supported her decision. They sold some of their belongings and did everything they could to gather enough money for her journey. Her destination was Texas, where she initially planned to stay with some relatives. In early 2004, she started working as a waitress in a restaurant. Later, she joined a company that placed nannies in households. It was through this job that she met the Lazarchik family. The Lazarchik family consisted of Father Michael, generally known as Mike, Mother Renee, their oldest daughter Alyssa, and the twin boys Ryan and Kyle. Little is known about the family background, except that they got married in 2000. Soon after their wedding, Renee became pregnant with their first child, Alyssa. After Alyssa's birth, they were expecting twins, Kyle and Ryan. The Lazarchik couple wanted to hire a trustworthy babysitter to take care of the twins when Renee went back to work. Alyssa was already attending a daycare where she had made several friends, so they decided she would continue being cared for there. They interviewed several candidates, and Ada stood out as the best option. She was young, but not a teenager. She appeared healthy, strong, polite, and cheerful. Renee wanted Ada to start immediately so that she could work with her for a few weeks and explain the household routines, the state of affairs, and her expectations. She also wanted to see how Ada would take care of the twins. The family had a specific requirement. They wanted assurances that Ada would stay with them for 18 months, and Ada agreed to this arrangement. Initially, they was agreed that she would spend only daytime hours in the Lazarchik household, but after some time they asked her to move in, and Ada agreed. Everything appeared to progress well. The Lazarchik family was satisfied with her work and grew fond of her, placing complete trust in her. Numerous photographs documented joyful moments with the smiling young nanny holding the twins. However, the situation changed dramatically in the summer of 2005. Ada informed the Lazarchik family that her relatives were returning to Peru before relocating to Germany. Ada was prepared to accompany them and had already purchased her plane ticket for October 29th of that year. Understandably, this came as disappointing news for the couple, as it was not in line with their previous agreement. Eventually, they understood and simply asked Ada to stay until they could find a replacement. They even requested her help in searching for and selecting her successor. Ada agreed, but from that moment on, she no longer stayed overnight at the Lazarchik's house. Instead, she returned to her uncle's house at night and came back early in the morning. Given the change in circumstances and Ada's impending departure, the Lazarchik family scheduled interviews with several nanny candidates on October 12th. During the day, Renee called Ada and asked her to prepare macaroni and cheese for the children. Ada fulfilled the request and fed the children. When Renee returned home, she greeted her children, saw that they were fine, and after interviewing the candidates, spent more than an hour with her little ones before they went to bed. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Kyle typically woke up crying at 5 a.m. on Thursday, October 13th. Twins usually sleep heavily and require someone to wake them, but Kyle woke up on his own. Renee got up, went to the twins' room, picked up Kyle, and soothed him until he fell back asleep. She then returned to bed. 2 hours later, at 7:30, Mike went to the kids' room, woke them up, hugged and kissed them, and left them in Renee's care before going to work. She changed Ryan's diaper, said goodbye to twins, and went to work. The kids were fine, nothing out of the ordinary, except for Kyle's early waking that day. His older sister, Alyssa, went to daycare as usual, but things took a dramatic turn around 1 p.m. when Ada called 911, very agitated, saying that one of the kids, Kyle, had stopped breathing and was turning blue. According to the information provided, the operator gave instructions on how to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation on the child. The person carried out the instructions until the emergency medical responders arrived. After a few minutes, they reached the house and took over the care of Kyle. They asked Ada what had happened, and she, very upset, explained that after lunch she had put Kyle down for a nap and returned to get his brother. But when she came back with Ryan, Kyle began vomiting and stopped breathing. While the paramedics were attending to Kyle, Ada called Renee to inform her of the situation, giving her a different version of the events. She said that after feeding the children, she took Kyle out of the high chair and, as usual, placed him on the playroom floor while she looked for his brother. But when she returned, Kyle was vomiting. She went to the kitchen to get a bowl to collect the vomit, and when she came back, Kyle had fallen. She said she picked him up, took him to the sink, and performed the maneuver that Renee had taught her in case any of the children stopped breathing, but it didn't work, and she also tried CPR. The paramedics transported Kyle to the nearest hospital after the initial treatment. When Renee arrived home, the ambulance with her son had already left, but the police were still on the scene. Renee took Ryan, the other twin, and asked Ada to accompany them. They followed the police, who escorted them to the hospital. During the trip, Renee called her husband, and they met at the medical center. A couple of minutes later, the doctors decided to transfer Kyle by helicopter to the Children's Hospital of Dallas. The Lazarchuk family returned home, leaving Ada in charge of Ryan, and headed to the Children's Hospital of Dallas. Ada asked them to keep her informed about Kyle's condition. On the way to the hospital, Renee began to worry that Ada might be too anxious to properly care for Ryan, so she called a friend to help the babysitter at the house. Ada, visibly distressed and crying, opened the door for Rena's friend shortly after the friend arrived at the house. The friend asked Ada to explain what had happened. According to Ada's account, Kyle had suddenly collapsed while standing between the playroom and the kitchen. Ada said she dropped the plate she was holding, picked up Kyle, took him to the living room, and performed CPR on him. Ada mentioned that Kyle's brain hadn't fully developed and that this issue had started at birth. The friend didn't fully understand, but Ada kept talking, expressing her love for Kyle and assuring that she would never hurt him. The friend tried to calm her, reassuring her that she hadn't done anything wrong and that she was a good person. In the meantime, at the Dallas Children's Hospital, the Lazarchuk family received devastating news. The doctor in charge of Kyle informed that the child had suffered severe head injuries, with multiple contusions on the head, left arm, and shoulder. A neurosurgeon met with the distressed parents to explain that something needed to be done to relieve the pressure on Kyle's brain, although survival was unlikely. A child abuse specialist who also met with Mike and Renee suggested that Kyle's injuries could be consistent with abuse. The specialist stated that Kyle's injuries were so severe, it was as if he had been in a car accident or fallen from a sixth-floor window. Renee initially found it hard to believe what had happened. She thought Ada might have accidentally dropped the child or was too scared or ashamed to admit it. However, the doctors clearly explained the severity of Kyle's head injuries and the amount of force required to cause them. Given this information, the possibility of an accident seemed unlikely. Renee promptly contacted another friend to pick up Ryan and remove him from the house. While this was happening in the hospital, Ada became increasingly anxious at home. Renee's friend had to go out to pick up her son from school and take him home. During her absence, Ada called her several times, asking if there was any news about Kyle. When Renee's friend returned to the house, she found Ada calm. Ada was no longer crying or talking. Shortly after, a police cart passed by the house. Seeing it, Ada lost her composure. She began to cry uncontrollably and scream, "No, no, no," collapsing on the floor behind a door and repeatedly insisting that she would never harm Kyle. Two female detectives arrived to interview Ada. She was the only adult present when the incident occurred. As the detectives located the house and got out of their patrol car, they heard Ada's cries. Upon entering, they found her extremely agitated. During the interview, the other officer called the hospital to get an update on Kyle's condition. When they discovered the diagnosis, the detectives told Ada that her story did not explain Kyle's injuries. Ada suggested that Kyle may have hit his head when he fell after she left him alone in the playroom, but the officers pointed out that the playroom floor was covered in soft carpets, making this explanation unlikely. When trying to offer another explanation, Ada said that Kyle may have hit his head on the doorframe when she was carrying him on her hip. In the officer's insistence, Ada showed how Kyle could have hurt himself and mentioned that Mike and Renee often hit Kyle's head without any problem. The officer checked the place where Ada claimed Kyle hit his head, but found no evidence of a strong impact. When the officers told her that the injury did not seem serious enough to have caused the extensive damage described by the doctors, Ada insisted that the impact was strong because she was running with Kyle in her arms. She also claimed that she had never shaken or hit any of the twins. The officers urged Ada to tell the truth, as it could save Kyle's life, but Ada provided no further explanation. Given the circumstances, the officers reported the situation to their command and took Ada into preventive custody for further questioning. The investigation team arrived at the crime scene to examine the house. After completing their task, they informed Renee's friend, who was staying at the house on behalf of the owners, that they could clean up and organize everything for the family's return. While cleaning the house, the friend found a piece of adhesive tape sticking out from the door of a cabinet under the kitchen island. When they opened the door, they noticed it was broken and held together by tape. As a result, opening it caused the door to become misaligned. They simply placed it back and secured it with the tape, but found it strange because Renee was always careful with broken items to prevent the children from getting hurt. They had a hunch and called the police to report the door. Shortly after, investigators returned to collect potential evidence. Later, when questioned about the cabinet door, Renee stated that she frequently used that door and had never seen it held with adhesive tape. By the time Friday, October 14th arrived, all of Mike and Renee's hopes had vanished. The doctors informed them that Kyle was brain dead and had no chance of recovery. Amid unimaginable grief, the couple authorized the removal of life support, and Kyle passed away 3 days later on October 17th. The detectives interviewed Ada in prison, where she was accused of premeditated assault on a minor. This time, Ada claimed that the day before the incident, she was preparing the macaroni and cheese that Renee had requested. Kyle was sitting on the kitchen countertop, and the child fell, landing headfirst on the kitchen floor and hitting his head hard. Ada said she picked him up and checked for injuries. The only thing she noticed was redness on his ear and the right side of his head. So she applied cold compresses and gave him a pain reliever. When the interrogators asked why she hadn't told this to the other officers, Ada said she thought they wouldn't believe her. She mentioned that she didn't tell Renee because, when she arrived home from work, Renee complained of a severe headache. Ada said Renee suffered from migraines and had requested that the lights be turned off and the house be kept quiet. The interrogators asked if she had fallen with the child, which she adamantly denied. During that interrogation, Ada learned that Kyle had died, and she cried for the rest of the interview. Ada was brought before the courts, where a judge charged her with aggravated homicide and set bail at $750,000, which was beyond the means of Ada or her family. Consequently, she remained in custody until the trial. At that time, the police indicated that she might be charged with premeditated actions, which could carry the death penalty. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Kyle testified that when he received the child, Kyle was already unconscious. The examination revealed multiple hematomas, bruises, on the right side of Kyle's head, as well as bruises on the left side of his head, shoulder, and both arms. Additionally, there were 2 small hemorrhages forming hematomas on the right temple. These multiple areas of hematomas on Kyle's head indicated that he had suffered 3 separate impacts. The examiner noted that the bruises were relatively recent, with one possibly being 12 to 16 hours old. Internally, Kyle had brain and retinal bleeding, which is indicative of severe trauma. Although there were no broken bones, the brain tissue was notably swollen, and the pressure inside Kyle's head was 90 millimeters of mercury, significantly higher than the normal level of 20 millimeters. Based on these findings, the examiner concluded that Kyle had suffered severe traumatic events consistent with blunt force trauma, possibly from someone hitting his head against a hard object. The examiner suggested that the type of injuries could also result from shaking and swinging a young child's head against a solid object, such as a kitchen cabinet door. The crucial testimony of a forensic analyst revealed that the distance between the fasteners of the broken cabinet door in the kitchen matched the abrasion marks on Kyle's head. This expert also analyzed the adhesive tape used to repair the cabinet door and found 2 DNA traces, one of which had a greater contribution and matched Ada's DNA. The minor trace could not be identified. After hearing from the experts, it was time for Mike to testify. He explained that Kyle was doing well the evening of October 12th and the morning of October 13th with no bruises. He also mentioned that he made breakfast that morning, opened and closed the kitchen cabinets to get utensils and food, and that all the doors were in perfect condition, including the one that was later found with an unexplained taped repair. The parents said they had breakfast with the kids and played with building blocks, with the twins crawling around in a playhouse. Based on all the evidence, it was easily concluded that the events that led to Kyle's death occurred when there were no other adults in the house. The prosecutor in the case stated that the exact circumstances of what happened to Kyle may never be known with certainty, but according to the evidence presented at the trial, she outlined a possible scenario. Perhaps Kyle didn't want to eat his lunch and, feeling frustrated or distracted by watching a soap opera, may have gotten out of his high chair without realizing the cabinet door was open. The prosecutor speculated that Ada's rage could have provoked the violent attack on Kyle's head using the cabinet door until it broke, leaving marks on the child. After all the testimony and closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. When they returned, they decided Ada guilty of capital murder of a child under 6 years old. When the verdict was read, Ada's mother, Fernandez, who had traveled from Peru when her daughter was arrested, stood up and shouted that she would free Ada because she was innocent. She stated that there was no evidence to convict her daughter and swore to start over with an appeal. After the jury left, Kyle's parents showed photographs and videos of their late son and told about his short 14-month life, from birth to the last picture taken a few days before his death. Family members talked about Kyle, while others simply couldn't stop crying. Ada was convicted a year later in 2006 to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For Ada and her family, giving up was not an option. Her parents immediately started a campaign to appeal the sentence, as they claimed that Ada's conviction was based on racism and ineffective public defense. But an appeal required money for legal representation and court costs, which the family did not have. In this case, Ada and her family have been continuously struggling to prove Ada's innocence. They are seeking support from various sources, including the Peruvian government, the Peruvian and Latino community in the United States, as well as solidarity organizations in Peru. In prison, Ada maintains her innocence and takes advantage of every opportunity for interviews. Their efforts have paid off, and in 2009, Ada's legal team filed an appeal citing 5 specific errors in the initial trial process. After reviewing the case, the appeals court rejected 3 claims but approved 2 claims. This was enough for the judges to overturn the verdict and cancel the trial due to irregularities. After this decision, Ada's family began fundraising efforts again to cover the $100,000 needed for a new trial. It took another 3 years to prepare for the new trial, which began on July 10, 2012, with the selection of 12 jurors from over 100 candidates. The defense maintained that Kyle fell from the kitchen counter on October 12 and sustained a head injury, and the situation worsened the next day when Ada, while running with the child in her arms, accidentally struck his head on the door frame. This time, the defense team presented testimony from a forensic expert with 40 years of experience. He suggested that some of Kyle's bruises may have been caused at the hospital during the insertion of a catheter to assess brain swelling. The prosecutor vehemently challenged this testimony. Another witness, an employee of the kitchen cabinet manufacturer, also testified for the defense, although he did not entirely rule out the possibility that Kyle's head could have hit the cabinet door. After the trial session was over, the jury deliberated for 5 hours, even requesting to listen to the 911 call recording again. Ultimately, they upheld the verdict. They once again found Ada guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her case remains a deeply contentious one, with her family continuing to fight for justice, asserting her innocence amid claims of a flawed judicial process and insufficient defense.